a woman devoted to her town.
She was the deputy county treasurer. Away from the courthouse, you saw a different person. She loved to dance.
Her life snuffed out in a savage attack.
There was quite a bit of blood.
She had been beaten pretty severely.
She had to have been terrified. She struggled at the end of her life.
She had no enemies. Nobody had a clue who would do something like that.
Police investigate several troubling theories.
Is it a close friend that got into an argument with her?
There had been some shouting matches.
Maybe she interrupted a burglary or a theft.
After months of false leads and dead ends,
the town was on high alert.
A stunning discovery breaks open the case.
It added a new twist to the crime.
All of a sudden you realize, maybe I don't know all my neighbors.
And points to a murderer in their midst.
I was kind of speechless at first.
I thought, my gosh. I mean, you just can't believe it.
The tiny farming community of Colon, Nebraska is one of the smallest towns in America, with a population of just over 100 people.
Colon, Nebraska is a very laid-back community, very close-knit families there. I think that if you went there, you would drive through and you go, oh, this is small.
Many people would leave their doors unlocked, their cars unlocked, keys left in the ignition, just a feel of safety, that there's no threat.
But then on June 30th, 2003, police receive a distressing call.
Around 6:42 in the evening, dispatch indicated to me that they had received a report of a possible suicide.
My friend, they ended up finding her body across the street in her garage, along with a gun.
He had called 911, and it was reported as a suicide. Once I arrived, the firemen on scene already were pointing me to a garage. I walked in and could see the body of a white female that was laying on the ground. There was quite a bit of blood, and there was disfigurement to the head and face area, so we could not recognize the victim. A black handgun was found near her head.
There is so much blood on the scene, investigators aren't able to determine the cause of death and need to wait for an autopsy to be sure.
The small black handgun didn't actually contain bullets, and we didn't find any shell casings in the area. The car had a smear on the driver's side, and then I did find that there was a smear of what appeared to be blood on the walk-in door that went out the side of the garage.
There was also what looked like blood spatter, where someone stepped in the pool of blood.
There was a footprint impression that was taken
that indicated that there was a second person there. This was a suspicious death.
There were DNA swabs taken on her body and of her clothing that she was wearing at the time. We noticed that her purse was located underneath her vehicle.
Was this just a botched burglary, or did the person have some other intention?
From the personal items in her purse, police identify the victim as 66-year-old Sharon Erickson.
Sharon was very well known. It was shocking to us as law enforcement to see somebody that was a fixture in the community being the victim in this case.
Born and raised in Nebraska's farm country, Sharon Erickson was a lifelong government worker.
Sharon worked across the hall from me. She was the deputy county treasurer. She was excellent, very honest. I would put her against anybody in the state of Nebraska for knowledge when it comes to the office of the treasurer. She would do anything for you. Gosh darn. When it came to the office or anything, she was always attentive and very, very helpful always.
In 1998, after 37 years of devoted service, Sharon retired.
Away from the courthouse, you saw a different person, more relaxed. She loved to dance, and if anyone wanted to dance, boom, she was on the dance floor. And boy, she was so good at dancing. I'm telling you what, boy, she could dance every dance until they'd shut the music off.
As a single woman, Sharon lived alone, but saw the people of Colon as her family.
People used to go to the bar and have coffee. Well, that one closed. Sharon came over and she says, I have a little front room in my house there. Would you come and remodel it and paint it for me? She had me fix that room up and gave the locals a key for coffee. Had a coffee pot in there. It was just somewhere where they could go. She didn't charge them. That's the type of person that you're talking about.
Police are at a loss when they realize Sharon was attacked just 50 feet away from the gathering spot she gifted to the town. Who could have wanted to kill her and why? Detectives expand their search for evidence to Sharon's home.
She lived in what used to be a grocery store and had converted to her house.
The other odd thing about Sharon's residence is that her garage was located across her house. And so to get to her car, she would have to walk out the front of her house and across Main Street.
What or who could have lured Sharon out of her home and to her death in the garage?
That we did find some damage to the back door that appeared to be consistent with some forced entry.
There was a coal chisel that was found next to the door that more than likely was used.
We also did find that the phone line had been cut.
There was at least some planning on the attack. Someone was obviously trying to prevent her from calling for help.
Inside, there was nothing out of place. When we started going room by room, we found that there was a holster for a small gun in her bedroom near the bed, and the gun was missing. That, along with her bed not being made and the back door having damage and being pried open, we started to have a picture in our minds that this may have occurred in the middle of the night.
Our assumption was that there was a burglary. She was alerted to the burglary because of noise coming from the person prying on the back door, that she got up out of bed, grabbed her gun, and went to investigate what was occurring before she was killed.
As investigators continue to process the scene, they are interrupted by volunteer firefighter and village postmaster Rick Hartman.
He was friends with Sharon. He actually was the one that found her body.
Mr. Hartman appeared to be a little more interested in the situation than some of the other firefighters that were there. Mr. Hartman had to be asked on several different occasions to stay behind the crime scene tape.
After it kept happening, it really alerted a lot of us to, why does he keep doing this? Is there something else going on? Is there something wrong?
Rick's behavior makes officers immediately suspicious, so they approach him for an interview on site.
During the interview, Mr. Hartman had indicated that he was really close friends with Sharon.
When Sharon would leave town, she would leave a key in her post office box for him to check on her house. So he was trusted by her.
Sharon would come visit him every day when she'd come pick up her mail.
But Rick tells police he didn't see Sharon that morning. He was asked to check on her after a worried relative didn't hear from Sharon that evening.
Rick Hartman, he had gone looking for Sharon. Sharon was nowhere to be found.
Mr. Hartman opened the garage door, and you could see Sharon laying beside her car.
Without prompting, he indicated that it was a suicide, that she had a gun, knew how to use it. But we were very confident that there was foul play involved.
When Rick is asked to make a formal statement, his demeanor abruptly changes.
He said, "If you're going to arrest me, otherwise I'm leaving." I was taken aback.
Why would he say that? Why would he do that?
We need to look a little harder at this person and find out what that was all about.
Coming up, new evidence reveals a disturbing detail.
She'd been sexually assaulted. I was definitely shocked
Small-town gossip sparks salacious rumors.
There may have been more than just a friendship there.
He was trying to hide additional evidence.
And just when detectives think they have the killer in their sights,
It had to be him.
a startling truth is revealed.
It sent shockwaves through the entire area.
I went, what? You've got to be kidding me.
Police investigating the murder of Sharon Erickson are speaking to her close friend, Rick Hartman. But when they ask him for a statement, Rick suddenly ends the interview.
He was upset that he couldn't leave and finally just told the investigators that I'm going to leave, and if you want to arrest me, go ahead and arrest me.
That was pretty out of character and uncharacteristic for somebody who had a friend that was just killed. So that immediately caused investigators some concern.
His statements and odd behavior really pointed us in a direction towards the postmaster.
Mr. Hartman gave his alibi. He was at home with his family, and that was confirmed by his wife.
Rick never had any criminal record or had done anything wrong, so there wasn't a great deal of focus on him any more than anybody else.
Rick's on the back burner for now, but investigators will keep him in their sights.
We didn't want to rule anybody out specifically, but we wanted to cast a wide net.
While investigators consider their next move, news of the murder, the first one in 40 years, travels fast.
The town of Colon was buzzing. Well, I got calls, bang, bang, bang. I can't remember who called first. I went, what? That's all I got, and I just was dumbfounded. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. When you hear of someone that you know and you knew for 25, 30 years, it's devastating. Everyone's just shaking their heads saying, how can this happen? How can this happen?
Sharon's death was a big loss for our community. She had known so many people through her work, through her friends, and to not have her in the community anymore, that always creates a hole. Everybody spoke well of her.
She was beloved by the people in the community. We didn't know where to start looking, so we tried to determine anything potentially that could have happened. Is it a close friend that got into an argument with her? Is it a neighbor that maybe didn't like her?
The day after the murder, police canvass Sharon's neighborhood.
They questioned almost everybody that knew Sharon about, have you heard anything? Do you have any information that can help us? And I said, I have no idea. No idea. She had no enemies. Nobody had a clue who would do something like that. It has to be someone that we don't know. I mean, it has to be someone that came from town.
While we don't have a lot of violent crime in the area, there was definitely one family that lived right behind Sharon that came to mind as somebody that could have been concerning.
The investigators had made contact with Jim Mars. He was an individual that would get into trouble here and there.
He wasn't real responsible. He associated with people that were involved in minor crimes such as burglaries, drug use.
I asked what his relationship with Sharon was, and basically it was just an acquaintance. Mr. Mars would see her occasionally outside of her house when he was going to the post office or on Main Street. They would say hi. He said he got in trouble by her a couple times for mischief when he was younger, and she would yell at him.
When we interviewed Jim Mars, he didn't know anything about Sharon's death, and he was so sorry that she died.
Jim had been in Kansas doing a roofing job. After he got back from Kansas, he eventually went to Wahoo, drank some beer with a friend, attempted to go to another bar. At that time, it was after closing time, and he drove the back roads home to Colon. He estimated he got home about 1:30 in the morning. Stayed up, watched TV, drank a pop, and then eventually went to bed.
His mom confirmed the time that he came home. Everything seemed to be okay with his story.
Investigators don't know the exact time of Sharon's death, so the 24-year-old remains on the suspect list. Before police leave, Jim gives them a tip.
Jim had indicated that there was a trucker that always had interactions and always seemed to be bickering with Miss Erickson. The truck driver may have parked a little bit on her property and she'd get upset about it. He might have his engine running on his truck and it would bother her.
She would bring it to his attention, and he would not necessarily comply with her request.
It was no secret the two didn't get along.
We were gaining information from friends that Sharon had disputes with this man.
Detectives must now determine if a run-in with the trucker turned fatal.
A lot of the community members felt that the truck driver was doing things to antagonize her and to cause more problems between them.
That was something that was public because there had been some shouting matches, some vocal exchanges about the fact that this truck was running all night.
Some of the people in the community who knew that he wasn't overly fond with Sharon, they kind of rumored him to be a suspect.
Maybe the frustration amongst the two had just finally boiled over. It just seemed suspicious.
I know the investigators had attempted to reach out to the truck driver in question and were unable to contact him.
Police do all they can, but can't track down the driver's whereabouts.
Today's technology is there's cameras everywhere. You're using your cell phone. At the time of this homicide, that kind of technology wasn't prevalent.
We didn't know if we were going to find that person.
Is Sharon Erickson's murderer on the run?
That's concerning. That was on the minds of probably all the citizens in this area. And probably the scariest thing for law enforcement in the community is that person likely to offend again?
Police hunting the killer of 66-year-old Sharon Erickson have a new suspect, a truck driver she had clashed with several times.
Had something escalated from vocal argument to some other level.
Now, detectives fear the trucker has fled the area.
We went door to door, asked people if they saw the truck driver. No one had any information about him, and it didn't appear we were any further along than we were the night we got there, and the town was on high alert.
There's a murderer out there. It's hard to contemplate. Hard to contemplate.
A week after Sharon's murder, detectives received the autopsy results.
The report did indicate that the death would have occurred sometime, most likely that night or the early morning hours of the day that she was found.
The medical examiner indicated that there was no gunshot wounds, that the gun had not been used in the commission of the crime.
The pathologist ruled the cause of death to be asphyxiation along with blunt force trauma.
It was found that Sharon had been beaten pretty severely. She had also been strangled. She also suffered some broken ribs and had some defensive wounds on her hands from fighting off her attacker.
The autopsy contains one more disturbing detail.
She had a small vaginal tear as well, which indicated that she'd been sexually assaulted. I was definitely shocked that there was a sexual assault involved.
Totally unexpected. It added a new twist to the crime, which further led to more questions. It really makes you feel for the victim. She had to have been terrified for those few minutes that she struggled at the end of her life.
During the autopsy, her underwear were taken for possible examination for DNA. This being pretty early in the DNA process in the early 2000s, we waited.
2 days later, on July 10th, the trucker is back in town and police bring him in for questioning.
He's not overly cooperative. He was reluctant to give any details about where he was, what he was doing.
Detectives press the trucker on his relationship with Sharon.
The truck driver wouldn't have called Sharon a friend. He felt irritated by the way she would overreact, I believe is how he termed it.
He did not have a good relationship with her.
But the truck driver vows he's no killer.
He told us he was out of town at the time of the homicide. He was in Wyoming or Colorado. He was hundreds of miles away and had receipts to prove it. Officers were sent off to corroborate the receipt. He was asked for a DNA sample and a polygraph, and he refused.
Was the trucker hiding something?
It's just one of the things that you can add to a list of items that if there's too many on that list, it's a problem.
With nothing concrete linking the trucker to the homicide, detectives have to let him go.
Law enforcement officers were in the process of interviewing and chasing down alibis.
We'd been following up with people, but there was not a lot of new information coming in and not a lot of credible information.
With Sharon's murder still unsolved, the community remains on high alert.
Before this happened, it was probably one of the safest places you'd want to be. Everyone's on their toes. You know, you drive up, you lock your car, you lock your house, you watch everything. Here's a lady that just retired, 60-some years old. Who could do this? It just was a shock to the whole county.
As a community, you want resolution, or you at least want to know why it happened and how can we get some justice out of this.
Although the entire town is mourning the loss of Sharon, Rick Hartman seems to be taking an unnaturally keen interest in the investigation.
Rick would ask us about what we were doing about other leads, and then he would insert his thoughts.
His behavior was a little more pushy, trying to get as much information as Rick could.
Is this just a concerned friend who wants to see how the investigation's going, or is there something more to than that?
Despite his odd behavior, Rick still has a solid alibi, and the investigation stalls.
We decided that we all needed to get back together and just have like a brainstorm session and say, what do we do? One of the things that we talked about is at the time of the homicide, early 2000s, meth had been a problem.
People would steal anhydrous ammonia from tanks and then use that to create their own methamphetamine.
Some of these people were heavy addicts, very dangerous, and involved in a lot of crimes.
One of the things that was being discussed with the anhydrous tanks was they were not too far from Sharon's home. So could she have seen something? Could she have spotted something, said something to make someone believe that she knew who they were and what they were doing?
Did Sharon confront them? Did they attack her to keep her quiet?
We might be looking for somebody who's manufacturing and selling methamphetamine who may have been in Colon on that particular night.
"5 weeks after Sharon Erickson is savagely beaten to death, detectives investigate whether she had been killed by a criminal gang manufacturing illegal drugs near her home.
It's an easy target, no cameras in that area. We were aware that Sharon kept an eye on Main Street. She a lot of times had information about suspicious people, something going on after hours there.
Sharon was one that if she saw something that she didn't think was right, she wasn't afraid to stand up and say something.
Maybe she saw something that she shouldn't have. She interrupted a burglary or a theft. As we talked to people around town, they also indicated that that might have been one of the reasons why Sharon may have been murdered.
Investigators had talked to local suspects who were involved in the manufacturing of methamphetamine. People that we had arrested previous to this incident, and then people from the metro areas. Most of them have pretty extensive criminal records, and they're heavily addicted. So the level of cooperation with somebody who's addicted to methamphetamine is not going to be very good.
It creates a difficult picture to paint. We were not able to generate the type of evidence or leads that we really would hope for.
We as a department were frustrated with things not happening real fast and the way that you always want.
The canvas fails to yield the information police were looking for, as does the investigation into the trucker.
As the investigation unfolded, the truck driver was eliminated. He was miles and miles away from the incident. We contacted the establishment where he got fuel, and it wasn't a phony receipt.
With this, the driver is fully off the suspect list.
After doing the first set of interviews and looking at potential suspects, the investigators really weren't able to focus on anybody that would be so mad or somebody that would want to sexually assault Sharon or to kill her. So it kind of left a lot of question marks. Where do you go? What do you look for? There's just a lot of unknowns.
We just don't know what's going on. Do we feel safe or do we need to worry?
Everybody had their ideas who did this, and I think it just kept going and going and going. People didn't have a clue, but they wanted to talk about it.
There was a lot of discussion amongst the community members as to what was going on. A lot of rumors floating around.
One of these rumors that starts circulating has to do with one of Sharon's good friends and a familiar name to detectives.
Because of Rick's close contact with Sharon, small town rumors began to surface that there may have been more than just a friendship there.
Many of the community members had mentioned rumors that Rick Hartman and Sharon had been having an affair.
We start to wonder, was there more to their friendship, maybe in a romantic way?
There was talk. This was something that was being discussed. So it's not that hard of a thought process or big of a leap to say, could he be involved?
Police talked to Rick again, this time at the sheriff's office.
He was cooperative. He somehow, I think, liked the attention.
But that changes when detectives ask Rick some very pointed questions.
Law enforcement actually asked him if there was a romantic relationship between the two of them.
He was immediately offended, and he denied that.
Mr. Hartman appeared to be very distraught. He said he was just friends with her, that there was no romantic relationship.
Could the sexual assault that appeared in Sharon's autopsy actually have been a consensual encounter with Rick?
That question certainly seems accusatory. Those things are not comfortable, but that comes with the job. You got to do your job. Rick was questioned in detail and really scrutinized on where he was, what his involvement was. There were a number of times he said, we got to look somewhere else because we were wasting our time on him.
He became agitated and wanted to go home.
Rick stands by the alibi he gave police back when they first questioned him 7 weeks ago at the crime scene.
Rick was home with his wife at the time that we believe Sharon was killed.
The investigators went and corroborated his story with his wife again.
We really had no reason to believe that Rick's wife would not disclose if he were gone at that time. Even though there were a lot of things that kind of pointed to him, he had a pretty good alibi.
With no hard evidence against Rick, detectives have to let him go, but not before getting one thing.
We collected DNA from Mr. Hartman.
We talked a little about it, and he says, but Don, I didn't do it. But again, you always have that doubt, what happened?
There was just speculation and suspicion.
2 months after Sharon's murder, detectives finally receive results from the forensics lab.
They had tried to do analysis on some of the items which were collected at autopsy to come up with a DNA profile.
Will this be the break detectives have been hoping for?
We were really needing something such as that to come through for us. Two
months after the murder of Sharon Erickson, police hope the DNA results they've been waiting for will confirm who they suspect is her killer.
There was quite a bit of speculation that it could be the postmaster in town.
We were contacted by our State Patrol lab. They believed that there was something there, but that they could not separate out a complete profile for comparison. It was kind of frustrating to know that there may be something there, but that maybe it was a dead end that we couldn't get past.
Without a DNA match, we as investigators knew that if that was the case, it would be very hard to solve this crime.
But detectives aren't giving up.
The Nebraska Medical Center could test smaller quantities than the State Patrol lab could do. So we made the determination that we would take our evidence and send it in to the other lab and have more DNA testing done.
Results will take months to come back. And with a killer still on the loose, nerves in small-town Colon, Nebraska begin to fray.
When the investigation went on and on and on, I thought, come on, we've got to find something. We had a murder back in 69 or 68 that was never solved in Wahoo. And of course, right away, you think, gosh, we got to find out who did this.
Could it be someone we do know? There can be a mistrust. All of a sudden you realize, maybe I don't know all my neighbors.
Then, police receive an unexpected tip that points back to the man they can't seem to rule out.
The estate of Sharon Erickson had a garage sale, and Rick Hartman was at the garage sale.
Mr. Hartman went in and purchased her mattress, and that was suspicious to us. If there was some sort of maybe DNA evidence or something that would be on the mattress that would be of interest to law enforcement, by somebody purchasing that and maybe getting rid of it, then it would be something that we would no longer be able to go back and utilize at a later time.
Did he want the mattress because they did have potential sexual activity on the mattress? Maybe he was out there trying to hide additional evidence. Every time investigators seemed to close a loophole with Mr. Hartman, something else happened. He kept drawing attention to him. It was just another thing that brought him back on radar.
Law enforcement asked him about his attendance there and what he bought. He actually denied that he bought her mattress. So then that caused law enforcement some concern on why would you buy it? Okay, why, if you did buy it, why would you lie about it?
Mr. Hartman agreed to undergo a polygraph, so he cooperated in that aspect, but he seemed nervous, on edge, jittery. The results from that polygraph were inconclusive. It left a lot of questions unanswered. It just added a little fuel to the fire.
Every chance that we could get that he could clear his name seemed to be something that elevated him to the next level.
The people in town were thinking it had to be him, and were scared to go to the post office.
In a small community where pretty much everybody knows everybody, it's easy to point fingers, it's easy to cast doubts.
I golfed with Rick Hartman that week at our golf league, and he was just nervous, he was just edgy and just scared.
A number of us may have felt like Mr. Hartman had acted inappropriately or suspiciously. We just didn't have enough to really push it over the top.
There was nothing that we could charge him with. We had no evidence that he committed the crime, other than he kept interjecting himself in the investigation.
Detectives hope that definitive proof will come from the Medical Center Forensic Lab.
The last piece that we didn't have back yet was the DNA evidence.
We got a phone call and they were able to isolate a DNA profile.
They actually located a sperm cell on her clothing, which was a positive breakthrough for us. The only person that it could have been from would have been the person that had sexually assaulted her and presumably killed her.
We felt that there was more hope in solving this than we had had for quite a while, because at least DNA is something that we can link to a specific person.
Armed with this DNA profile, police immediately zero in on their top suspect.
We did send in Rick Hartman's DNA. Came back not a match.
Rick's name is finally cleared from the suspect list, once and for all.
Scientific evidence is what it is. It confirmed everything that he was telling us. There was no romantic relationship.
We were focused on an individual that had absolutely nothing to do with the homicide. I apologize for any stress we caused him or his family.
But if it wasn't Rick, then who killed Sharon?
One of the big concerns that we had is that if this was a stranger that was maybe passing through town, or someone completely not associated with the community or with Sharon, that it potentially could go unsolved without any additional evidence coming forward.
Investigators are back to square one, but they come up with a new game plan.
We try to determine who else should we go out and collect samples from, who else were potential suspects, who could have done this, and who would provide those samples so we can send them in and see if there's a match.
It was just a matter of being able to find that one person out there in the world that belonged to. We're trying to get that needle in a haystack.
10 months after Sharon's murder, in April 2004, police get the results of their DNA dragnet.
The lab got a confirmation that they had a match.
We now know who killed Sharon. It was the breakthrough that we needed.
It sent shockwaves through the entire area.
Almost a year after the murder of Sharon Erickson, police have matched DNA from the crime scene to her killer.
The DNA came back and it matched Jim Mars.
James lived nearby to Sharon. He was one of the people that police talked to early on.
Jim had known Sharon nearly all his life.
He had helped her out when he was younger, doing some yard work or snow removal.
I was kind of speechless at first because he had no problem providing his DNA to law enforcement.
I was shocked to find out that James Mars was the perpetrator. We had never seen that type of violence out of him.
Once we had a DNA match with Jim, we needed to figure out where the holes in his alibi are.
When we originally interviewed Jim Mars, he said he'd been out in a bar in Wahoo and later went home. The bartender believed the timeline that Jim had given us was fairly accurate.
Jim's mother stands by her story, too.
I think those alibis were solid, but they didn't cover him for the whole evening. What I think happened is he was home and left. He lived right across the back alley from Sharon's house. And even if he would have been home, that doesn't mean he didn't leave his house. The determination was that we did have enough evidence to proceed with the arrest and prosecution of Jim.
We went to his residence very early in the morning, and he answered the door, and we placed him under arrest. He was shocked that he was being arrested, that he was considered the suspect. We brought him in to interview him.
Police try to establish a motive.
That was one of the unique things in this case, to find out and even just try to resolve that big why. Why would that even happen?
He was reluctant to give any details. There were a number of times he said, "I don't remember." He sobbed at times.
He said he didn't have anything to do with it, denied that he had any involvement. When asked about the sexual assault, he stated that Sharon was an old lady and he wouldn't do that. And from that point on, he stated he wanted an attorney, and we stopped our questioning.
We had filed charges for first-degree homicide, sexual assault.
News of his arrest hits the community hard.
This was very unexpected. I thought, my gosh, something's wrong here. I mean, You just can't believe it. I was hoping that they'd catch someone that I did not know the family.
The reaction in town was split. There was definitely a thought that, oh, it couldn't have been him that did it. And then there were supporters that, well, we thought maybe it was him.
While investigators are confident that DNA evidence will be enough to get a conviction, they get even more ammunition against Jim.
We had at least 5 inmates come forward with information that Mr. Mars had confessed to them. He struck her, strangled her, killed her. These inmates were going to testify against him that he had confessed to them.
With this information, investigators pieced together what happened the night of the murder.
Jim was at the bar, like he said. He had a few too many drinks at some point. Went home. He wasn't able to sleep.
From what he told the other inmates, he was looking for some money. He thought Sharon may be an easy target. He was just going to burglarize her house.
He climbed over Sharon's fence in the backyard, cut her phone line so she wouldn't be able to call anybody, pried her back door open, and ended up kicking the door in order to go see if he could find her purse or find some money that was laying around.
Once that back door was kicked in, Sharon woke up.
He was confronted by Sharon, who was holding a gun and threatened to shoot him at that point if he didn't leave.
Sharon went to call 911 and her phone line was dead. She kept her cell phone in her car for emergencies.
Sharon ran across the street to get into her car. Jim chased her down, caught her, and ended up attacking her.
He punched her and then eventually choked her to death.
There was a sexual assault. He refused to talk to the inmates about that.
Had he not sexually assaulted her and we didn't have any DNA, we would never have it solved. When you have a sperm cell that was a perfect match, there's nobody else that could be responsible.
The chance of this being another person was out of this world. With the evidence we had, this was a slam dunk for his conviction.
On August 15th, 2005, Jim Mars pleads guilty to second-degree murder. He is sentenced to life with no possibility of parole.
When I found out there was a sexual assault that went along with the slaying, I was just furious. What kind of person would do something like this? You've got to be kidding me. And the community was appalled. I was happy that we finally got closure. He did it. He's locked up.
Sharon was the one that suffered the ultimate loss. And that's what the investigators put in all those hours of work for and give her last voice.
Sharon's presence is missed in Colon to this day.
To not have her in the community, that's tough. There's pain and sadness.
Sharon loved her community. Yes, she did. She was very good to my kids and very good to me and my family. Really a good lady.
He was a popular high school teen with a big heart.
He was loved by everybody. He was there for anybody, anytime.
He was a really likable and caring person.
Until his life was violently stolen while he slept.
It was unbelievable because I was trying to figure out what was going on.
We pretty much are starting with a blank slate.
It was really a whodunit. Don't have a lot of answers.
Detectives unearth a world of deceit and intimidation.
She said if he would have just kept his mouth shut, this never would have happened.
There were two teenagers bragging about being connected with a homicide.
He was already in custody, so was this something that he had orchestrated?
To reveal a sinister plot.
A fisherman contacted the police department and said, hey, I found this gun.
So that was a twist where you never would have expected that.
The whole scenario was crazy.
And discover a mastermind no one expected.
We were dumbfounded, like, what just happened here?
I don't think anybody thought that this is how it would end.
I felt totally betrayed. I wasn't just shocked, I was floored.
Set against the picturesque backdrop of the Oregon mountains, the small town of Eugene is 100 miles south of Portland.
The community is nice. It's a good place to raise a family. It's a college community. The University of Oregon is there. It's a beautiful area of the Pacific Northwest.
Eugene's a small town, relatively. We're like the second or third largest city in Oregon, but that's still about 200,000 people. It's a quiet place.
In the early morning hours on Monday, October 3rd, 1994, the serenity of this close-knit community is shattered.
911 call was made. It was a mother who was in anguish. Her teenage son had been seriously injured, bleeding from his head.
Emergency units raced to the home, arriving in a matter of minutes.
When the first responders arrived, they were able to quickly assess that it was a gunshot wound to the head. And although he was unconscious, he was still alive.
As paramedics battled to save the teen, police arrived to investigate the shooting. Janice Itura identifies the victim as her 18-year-old son, Aaron Itura.
Aaron Itura was almost immediately transported to the hospital.
As detectives get to work, they need to determine who would shoot a teenage boy and why.
In short order, we're preserving the scene, beginning to document it with photographs, and start gathering information. His bedroom had been partitioned off inside the attached garage of the residence. He had furnished it or decorated it as, typical teen male would. He had been in bed asleep with a girl that he was dating at the time. We knew he had sustained a devastating gunshot wound to the head.
The girlfriend who was lying beside him was unharmed. Police asked her to wait with the family while they continued to investigate the crime scene.
And a fragment of the bullet was found at the scene. It seemed like the caliber of the gun was a .38 caliber.
The weapon is nowhere to be found, and there's no sign of forced entry to the home.
Somebody had just opened the garage door. It wasn't locked.
There's nothing of value missing. Detectives wonder if the attacker could have a personal motive.
If somebody had a gun and they went in there to steal property, but the people woke up and discovered them, you would expect both people to be shot. The fact that one person wasn't shot and the other one was would indicate that there's a motive to single that person out.
With the crime scene yielding little information, detectives question those closest to Aaron, his family and girlfriend, who were at the scene of the crime.
I mean, it was a really whodunit out of the blue. Don't have a lot of answers.
The police department were still trying to figure out what happened and who was involved.
The detective questions how Janice came to find Aaron.
Aaron had gone to his room, and his girlfriend, Carrie, was spending the night. And then all of a sudden, about 1:30 in the morning, I hear screaming. So I went out to the bedroom, and here's Aaron on the bed, and his girlfriend, Carrie's just freaked out. And I looked at Aaron, and he had a big old gash on his head. Then I saw blood. And I called 911, and then I just grabbed him and held him for a while. I was trying to figure out what happened.
Aaron Itura was born on December 28, 1975. He was the oldest of 5 children, raised by single mom Janice.
Aaron was a good kid. He was there for anybody, anytime. And he had a lot of responsibilities as far as helping out, because I worked sometimes 2 jobs, and he took care of all of his young siblings.
Growing up, Aaron was always tall for his age and came to be known as a gentle giant.
People described him a big, lovable teddy bear. He was a really likable and caring person with a mom who was really involved in his life.
In his last year of high school, Aaron was popular, well-respected, and easygoing.
Well, he liked to draw. He wanted to go to art school in New York, and that was his goal.
Recently, Aaron had found love with a local girl named Carrie.
She worked at the little neighborhood store, and they had been dating about 4 or 5 months.
Aaron took pride in his community and was highly active in the area's anti-gang movement.
He had the courage to step up and do what was right. He was just the type of guy that people came to with their problems. He was the protector. He watched out for everybody.
Aaron was looking ahead to a bright future. No one can think of anyone who'd want to shoot this young man point blank in his own bed. Investigators turned to Aaron's girlfriend, Carrie, who was lying next to him during the attack. Carrie tells detectives she awoke to the sound of the gunshot, but couldn't see much in the dark.
Carrie, the girlfriend, certainly needs to be looked at as a potential suspect because of her proximity at the time the shooting occurs.
The police decided to take her down to the police station and to talk to her in a lot more detail about what she knew.
While police transfer Carrie to the station, detectives focus on Aaron's family.
In the early stages, it's really important to exclude witnesses from being possible suspects. Part of the procedure of the police was to take gunshot residue swabs from the people in the house.
I needed to get to the hospital. I needed to see how he was. But we couldn't leave. We had to wait till we were cleared through the gunpowder residue testing.
Aaron's mom and siblings test negative for gunshot residue. They immediately race to the hospital.
Janice was almost immediately notified by a doctor that her son's brain scans showed that there was no brain activity.
The nurse was trying to tell me that, he's not going to make it.
Later that morning, the decision is made to take Aaron off life support.
I think he just was done fighting. I lost a big chunk of my heart. I just couldn't believe that I'll never see him again.
As Aaron's family grieve their devastating loss, at the station, detectives interview Aaron's girlfriend, Carrie. They ask her if she knows of anyone who would want to harm Aaron.
She claimed she didn't know why this occurred and who would have a motive to have killed him.
When detectives question Carrie about trouble in their relationship, she denies any problems.
Maybe she just wasn't being straight or truthful. Right off, you can't rule out the possibility that someone like Carrie may have shot Aaron for some personal motive.
Forensics check Carrie's hands and clothing to determine if she fired the weapon that killed Aaron.
Gunshot residue wasn't there. Swabs confirmed that she was not involved in a shooting.
With Carrie ruled out as the shooter, police ask her if anything unusual happened that night. She tells police about a mysterious phone call Aaron received just hours before the crime.
Carrie had mentioned a call had been made to the house. It was some girl, just wanting to know if Aaron was there. And then the caller hung up.
Investigators have Carrie walk them through the moments before Aaron was shot.
She said she was laying next to him. They were both fast asleep when she was awakened by some noise, which, as it turns out, was a gunshot.
Then, Carrie reveals a crucial detail.
Carrie becomes a key part of the investigation. She mentioned that she had seen who did it.
Coming up, the investigation takes a stunning turn.
What we learned indicated that they knew a lot more about what happened than what they'd said originally.
And unravels a tale of betrayal.
And I'm just like, did I just hear her say what I think I heard her say?
There was almost something pathological about their relationship.
To reveal a ruthless killer hiding in plain sight.
They were absolutely a master manipulator.
It was what they call a Jekyll and Hyde.
It was really shocking how the case turned.
Police are investigating the murder of 18-year-old Aaron Itura, gunned down in his sleep. Aaron's girlfriend, Carrie, is the sole eyewitness to the crime, and police are hoping she can provide them with a lead.
The police department are still trying to figure out what is the reason why he would be singled out and killed.
Detectives continue to question Carrie about the details surrounding the murder.
Carrie provided information to the police that it was two killers. She believed they had their faces covered with bandanas and their hands covered, so she could not get a good description of them. She was able to identify them as young males, but not much beyond that.
But who could the two masked assailants be? Police ask Carrie if she can think of anyone in her recent past who would want to harm Aaron.
She might have had a jealous ex-boyfriend who might have had a grudge against Aaron that she would have been aware of. And so we were exploring all of those avenues to find any potential connections.
After interviewing Carrie, police dig into her background and find no serious ex-boyfriend or anyone else that could link to the crime. With no significant leads, investigators turn to the community for help.
We pretty much are starting with a blank slate. The police had kind of fanned out, into the community and were asking people whether they knew anything about what had happened to Aaron Itura.
But no one heard or saw anything suspicious. For this laid-back community, news of Aaron's brutal murder is a shock.
All we knew was this young man had been sleeping in his bed and somebody had gotten in there and shot and killed him. We were dumbfounded, like, what just happened here? This is Eugene, Oregon. You don't have young people being killed right in their home, in their bedroom while they're sleeping. And people were scared.
Detectives begin to look at Aaron's work with the anti-gang group. Had he made some dangerous enemies?
Law enforcement was certainly concerned about gang activity. There was a sense, anyway, that Aaron, he's been at these anti-gang task force meetings, and now this kid has been shot in the head. So it certainly raises questions.
Police learned that Aaron had been working closely with local anti-gang activist Mary Thompson.
A lot of people knew who Mary Thompson was. She was wanting to sound the alarm about gangs in Eugene. And she established herself as kind of the citizen voice among law enforcement and other agencies dealing with that. She was a working mom with a teen, her son Bo, who was getting in and out of trouble.
Mary Thompson was involved in publicizing the threat of gangs. How that developed for her was that her son Bo, who was 16 and had gotten involved in some gang activity and serious crimes.
She said he's a member of a local Crip gang, and if it can happen in my family, it can happen in any families. And oftentimes she was going to various schools and in the media for an anti-gang sentiment.
Mary's home was open to troubled teens trying to avoid gang life, but she needed help with her expanding network.
Aaron got approached in school about assisting with the community outreach. He took that role seriously.
Aaron was very proud. Sometimes I could hear him talking to his sisters about, I've got to do this. I'm going to help some kid someday, and Mary's on the right track. I thought she was amazing. Here's a woman that's 40-some years old, and she is out with Aaron, making people aware, because most people in this town had no idea that this was going on.
The day after the murder, investigators pay Mary a visit, looking for a lead.
She was shocked that Aaron Itura had been shot and killed, and more than willing to try to help in any way that she could. She offered a whole list of names of people that she knew were associated with him.
Then, Mary shares a disturbing detail.
When the police went to talk to Mary Thompson, she told them about a gang member from Portland that was a Crip that had stopped by her house looking for Aaron Itura before the homicide. And she identified him by the name of Sonny and said what kind of car he was driving. And this gang was dangerous.
He wasn't somebody that she previously knew, just that he had showed up and was inquiring about Aaron. Where does he live and what can you tell me about him, sort of thing. Her information was that people in the gang life up in Portland were upset because of Aaron's cooperation in anti-gang efforts. Given the proximity of when this had occurred to Aaron's death, you couldn't ignore that this might all be coming out of people in Portland. She provided a general description of Sonny and of a car that he was driving. He wasn't on our radar. So the information about Sonny was documented and passed on and shared with the Portland Gang Bureau.
While Portland's gang unit tracked down Sonny, Eugene police talked with Aaron's friends. Had Aaron been concerned for his own safety before the murder?
They said before the homicide, Aaron Itura told them a story about a gang member wanting to do harm to him. But there's not a lot of information.
This could be significant. This might, in fact, be gang-related. So we were looking for the active gang member of Sonny.
Less than 36 hours after Aaron Itura is found shot in his bed, investigators believe the cold-blooded murder of the teen could be tied to his work in an anti-gang group. According to Aaron's mentor, Mary Thompson, a gang member named Sonny had been looking for him.
The result of the inquiry with Portland has come back and they came up blank. They had no information about any Sonny. The car description didn't match anything in their files. So it was a big zero. They were saying we don't have anything. So as a result of that, we were frustrated that we didn't have a suspect.
Then, detectives received the autopsy results.
Aaron sustained a fatal gunshot wound to the head, and it was a single shot.
It was an aim shot with a .38 caliber to the back of the head that would go through the brain, would have almost 100% chance of causing the death of the person that was hit.
48 hours into the case, with few clues to investigate, the pressure on police increases.
There's a sense of uncertainty and unease, that can permeate the community if you don't solve this crime, if it remains unsolved.
When you're in a small community, you want some answers because somebody out there in the town we live in snuck into the bedroom of this young man and killed him. That's scarier than anything when you don't know any other details.
The lack of progress also takes a toll on Aaron's family.
There was times that I would have been willing to follow Aaron, but I put my grief on the back burner. Continue taking care of my kids because it's not their fault. But it was so hard with just certain songs, certain times. I just would kind of collapse. It's just kind of what you do.
Fortunately, Janice isn't without support. Friends like Aaron's mentor, Mary, help the family get through tough times.
Mary Thompson was very sorry. She couldn't understand who would ever do that. We both were grieving. So I got some really nice words from her. I'm in the mindset of, well, we got to catch who did this, who shot him. And she's like agreeing with me, yeah, we need to find out who did this.
At the station, police search for new leads and find a report about a recent incident involving Aaron, and are surprised when they come across a familiar name.
Mary Thompson's son, whose name was Bo Flynn, was connected to this case. He was 16 years old. Bo had been involved in the juvenile system before for his violence and criminal activity. He was empowered and emboldened by dangerous crime.
We learned that Mary asked Aaron to keep an eye out for Bo and try to steer him clear of trouble. The plan was just simply for Aaron to spend time with Bo, be a positive influence.
But instead of Bo moving away from trouble, he drags Aaron into it. 3 weeks before the murder, they have a dangerous encounter.
Bo and Aaron were in West Eugene and encountered some other youths. And one of them had some prior issue with Bo. Bo suspected that this kid had snitched him off, or they got into an argument or whatever it might be. The confrontation escalated. Bo, who was carrying a knife, produced the knife and ended up cutting the other kid. Patrol officers arrived and they both were arrested.
Aaron went to the Lane County Jail. I had to go down and get him. And I was so mad at him that I said, you're responsible for your actions. but he did know right from wrong. And he was not afraid to stand up for what was right.
Then, Aaron makes a risky decision to testify against Bo. Aaron was killed on October 3rd, just 2 days before he was due to give his witness statement. Was this the reason for Aaron's murder?
We consider the possibility that Bo was involved in the killing, especially as this potential motive emerged that Aaron was a witness in a pending case against Bo that would result in him being incarcerated potentially 3 or 4 years.
Investigators pay a visit to Bo, who's in custody at the state's juvenile facility for the knife assault.
He was already in custody at the time that the homicide occurred, so was this something that Bo had orchestrated?
When detectives interview Bo Flynn and ask him what happened, Bo Flynn says, I didn't do anything, I don't know anything about it.
At the time, there wasn't any credible information that developed that suggested that he had orchestrated this crime.
The police don't have any evidence that gives Bo's role in the commission of this murder.
Having lost Bo as a viable suspect, detectives are at risk of hitting a standstill in the case. But then, Aaron's mom contacts police with a disturbing new lead.
I told him that somebody heard a couple of other people at the high school were talking about how they were going to take care of the big guy, and we all knew the big guy was Aaron because he was the biggest kid at Willamette High School.
We also were hearing rumors that there were 2 young gang members involved in the community bragging about being connected with a homicide.
Police dig deeper into these rumors, turning to Aaron's friends for more details.
When we're talking to kids that were associated with Aaron, we're just trying to find out, what do you know and who could have done this? Jim Elstad and Joe Brown had been identified as part of this loose-knit group of kids that were often frequenting the Thompson residence. And they were kind of on the fringe. The information persisted that both admitted and talked about the murder itself. They were saying that they had done the killing. They were proud of what they'd done. These kids needed to be contacted. Even as we were working, it was really shocking how the case turned.
Police investigating the execution-style shooting of 18-year-old Aaron Itura have a new lead. 2 local teens have been bragging about the killing.
What the word was on the street was Joseph Brown and James Elstad were the 2 individuals involved in the killing of Aaron Itura.
I knew they were friends of Bo's, but these kids were Aaron's friends as well. Jim Elstad grew up with my kids. His little brother was my daughter's best friend. And hearing that he would even be involved was just bizarre. But that's what they were saying.
We were told from the circle of kids that were being identified and contacted said that Jim Elstad and Aaron Itura had been friends at one time, and that most recently, leading up to the homicide, that relationship had soured. So, a source of friction that should be explored and investigated.
Joe Brown and Jim Elstad, they didn't appear to have criminal records, so there wasn't a whole lot to go on.
Before police can speak to the 2 teens, they get a surprise visit from Mary Thompson.
She indicated that she also heard that Joseph Brown and Jim Elstad might have been involved in the homicide.
But what Mary reveals next stuns the detective.
The homicide happened on October 3rd in the early morning hours, and she tells the police that both Elstad and Brown ended up coming to her house after the homicide and telling her that they had killed Itura.
Acknowledged that she hadn't been entirely candid with us from the beginning. Her explanation for that was, well, I just didn't believe him. I just couldn't imagine them doing it. I wasn't seeing anything in their demeanor that suggests that they had done this homicide, and so I didn't volunteer that information up front because I didn't think it was credible at the time.
But now Mary believes the 2 teens could have been telling the truth. Armed with this new information, police bring Jim Elstad and Joe Brown to the station for questioning.
When they were interviewed, both of them denied any knowledge of the homicide. Elstad and Brown had agreed to take polygraphs. as a way to clear themselves of suspicion. And so they reach polygraphed that same day, and both flunked.
Detectives grill the teens for hours, and eventually they break down and confess.
Brown and Elstad finally acknowledged that they had been involved and had done the homicide.
To understand how Aaron Itura was killed that night, police have Joseph Brown recreate the murder at the crime scene.
He had agreed to come back and do what we call a walkthrough, where you're basically doing a videotape statement and you're describing, and in some instances you might even enact, what occurred.
Joe tells police he was the lookout, and Jim Elstad was the one who shot Aaron. But what was their motive?
Gradually what emerged was they were upset because their homie, Bo, was at risk of being incarcerated further because Aaron was cooperating with the police and was willing to testify against him in this knife incident.
In their statements, Joseph Brown and James Elstad took personal responsibility for the homicide. They did not say that their activities were at the direction of Bo.
Detectives need something concrete to corroborate their story, so they ask about the murder weapon. When police ask Joe Brown what happened to the gun, he tells them it's in the river.
After the homicide, Joseph Brown throws the gun into the river to dispose of it.
Police search the river for the gun, but can't find it.
The fact emerged, that we were looking for the weapon. A fisherman contacted the police department and said, hey, I don't know if it's connected or not, but I was fishing that stretch of the river, and I found this gun. So a patrol officer is sent out and takes possession of the gun from him and books it into evidence. They then do a ballistic check on the gun, and they find out it was consistent with the murder weapon.
You have their confession, and you got the murder weapon, so you can corroborate their confession to the point where the conviction of those two people is solid.
On October 6, 1994, Jim Elstad and Joe Brown are arrested for the murder of 18-year-old Aaron Itura.
It was very hard to find out. Jim Elstad shot Aaron while he was sleeping. It was just unbelievable.
After the arrests, Aaron's mentor, Mary Thompson, reaches out to Janice.
Mary called me. First it was like, well, we need to get together, maybe have a coffee, and I'll buy you lunch. And then she said, if Aaron would have just kept his mouth shut, this never would have happened. And I'm just like, did I just hear her say what I think I heard her say? At that point, I got real concerned. So I called Detective Rainey and told him what happened.
What we learned indicated that Mary knew a lot more about what happened than she had said originally.
For police, Mary's alarming statement is one of many things they are now questioning.
Initially, it was thought to just be this homicide that had been committed by these two guys, but there was just this overriding perception that she was more involved than she had admitted.
Less than a week after 18-year-old Aaron Itura was shot to death in his bed, former friends Jim Elstad and Joe Brown are charged with his murder. But now, the actions of Aaron's anti-gang mentor, Mary Thompson, have detectives thinking the case is far from over.
Mary Thompson's behavior had been raising some red flags.
She failed to mention that Brown and Elstad came to her house that night. It was just a convenient fact that she forgot to mention. And she also had made a call to Janice. That was actually unusual, suspicious in nature.
At that point, the police decided to take her down to the police station and to talk to her in more detail.
Investigators want to know why Mary withheld information surrounding Aaron's murder.
In that interview, she talks about being extremely angry with Aaron Itura after he informed on her son about the knife fight. But she didn't want him to be killed.
Do we know for sure that she's implicated in the murder? No. Can we prove it at that time? No.
Since police lack solid evidence that Mary is involved, they let her go. With the killers behind bars, Erin's loved ones gathered to say their final farewells.
It was one beautiful, beautiful day. High school kids, teachers, counselors, they all showed up. Mary was there as well. And there was probably 2,000 people. People I didn't even know were there. Erin was loved by everybody.
5 days after the arrest of Erin's murderers, police are still troubled by Mary Thompson's unusual behavior, so they dig deeper into her past.
10 or 15 years prior, there was some other events in Josephine County, which is a county in southern Oregon. She had identified herself as being a person that was working as an assistant to prosecuting the drug trade. And it turned out that she was a methamphetamine manufacturer at that time, and that she got caught selling methamphetamine. Looking at Mary Thompson's past, she was engaged in a criminal activity. It was definitely shocking. She was a crime fighter that the community trusted, that had engaged in that kind of behavior. So that was a twist where you never would have expected that.
Mary's history proves she's capable of lying and manipulating to get what she wants. Now investigators wonder what she's capable of in connection to this case.
As we knew and learned more about her, it was pretty eye-opening, shocking even to investigators. Part of the picture that emerged about Mary was her relationship with her son, Bo, and how protective she had been of him.
She'd had a bunch of relationships in her life that had not turned out, and the only one that stayed with her was Bo Flynn, her son. And so she was willing to do things that were antisocial and illegal in order to maintain Bo's relationship with her. She viewed herself as being a peer. Instead of directing her son to be a law-abiding citizen, she chose to get in the criminal gutter with him.
There was almost, I'm no expert, but almost something pathological about their relationship in terms of what a parent will do to protect their child.
She knew that Erin was the only thing standing between her and her son's charges.
After Bo, the only person that had a motive to eliminate Itura as a witness was Mary Thompson.
Detectives start questioning the teens Mary claims she's been keeping out of gangs.
When we're talking to kids that were identified as having frequented the Thompson residence, they weren't involved in school, they didn't have healthy relationships, they were all kind of lacking something in their life and felt that. It seemed that she already had developed a family structure that she was able to manipulate for her own purposes, and she had somehow orchestrated the murder of Erin Itura, and as a result of that, she began emerging more and more as this prime suspect.
But could Mary go so far as to have Erin killed?
To advance this investigation, the idea came up about doing a wiretap to see if something was being said here that could be used to either eliminate Mary from suspicion or would lead to evidence to convict her of murder.
On the wiretap, detectives hear Mary's son, Bo, who's on parole, discussing gang activities with other gang members.
They called themselves the 74 Hoover Crips.
They were involved in selling drugs and stealing property. We were thinking it was possible Bo was in charge of the gang.
Just when investigators think Bo is the gang leader, someone else comes on the line.
It became quickly apparent that Mary was calling the shots. She was pressuring people to do stuff.
Mary Thompson's role in the gang is definitely as a leader.
They heard Mary planning robberies, beatings, car thefts, just a hive of criminal activity.
Mary Thompson, in her exchanges, in these intercepted phone calls, clearly is talking the talk. I mean, she knows the lingo, the street language, and she's a very legitimate threat. She tells them she's got connections outside of Eugene even that, if need be, she can marshal to come in and start dealing with people.
But nothing links Mary directly to Aaron's murder until she makes a telling statement.
There's a conversation that she has with a gang member, and she says, "Don't worry, I haven't screamed at you, have I? Aaron Itura got screamed at before he got whacked. He knew how I felt." So she essentially admits to the gang killing Itura.
We ripped off the veneer of her being this concerned mom who only immersed herself in this culture out of concern for her son. Facts that we're developing were pretty revealing.
Though the admission is damning, detectives know they'll need more to secure a conviction.
We felt that we needed a direct witness who would tell us about all these conversations that happened, up and including the homicide of Aaron Itura. Our tactic was to break the gang, essentially, and to see what we could do about getting them to testify against Mary Thompson.
In the cold-blooded killing of Aaron Itura, police have arrested 2 young gang members. Now, wiretaps have revealed Aaron's anti-gang mentor, Mary Thompson, is actually a ruthless gang leader.
Mary Thompson became a prime suspect in the case, and the wiretaps were really instrumental in revealing the extent of the influence that Mary had.
Investigators are now convinced Mary is behind the 18-year-old's murder. But to charge her, they need additional evidence.
We arrested the gang for all of these crimes that they committed that we knew about during the wire, whether it was committing a burglary or stealing weapons.
Investigators then question the teen gang members, hoping to get them to flip on Mary. The prosecutor thinks their best shot lies with one of the youngest members of the gang, named Lisa.
We decided that we were going to give Lisa immunity on the condition that she testified about the gang and about the homicide of Aaron Itura.
Lisa agrees to tell investigators everything she knows.
It became pretty clear not only was Mary the leader of the gang, but when it came to eliminating Itura, the behavior of Elstad and Brown was guided by her.
Mary was always saying that something's got to be done about Aaron. We can't let him testify against Bo, and that shifted to actually killing him.
From Lisa's account of Aaron's murder, the missing pieces fall into place.
The Friday before the homicide, there's a big meeting of the gang at Mary Thompson's house. Mary encouraged Jim Elstad to commit the homicide. On the night of the murder, Lisa's role is that she is the one that calls Itura's residence. And when Itura answers the phone, she hangs up on him. And that information gets communicated back to Jim Elstad and Joseph Brown that Itura is at his house and they should go forward and commit the crime.
Mary tells Brown and Elstad to wait until everyone in the Itura home is asleep.
1:30 in the morning, when Aaron was in bed with our girlfriend, Carrie, they were both fast asleep. Brown and Elstad had snuck into the room, and Joe Brown was the lookout. And then Jim Elstad hadn't hesitated and fired once into Aaron's head. Carrie then was awakened by that noise. By then, Elstad and Brown had fled the garage. They go to Mary Thompson's house after having committed the homicide, and then Joe Brown gets taken to the river, and Mary Thompson takes him there to dispose of the gun. And this is kind of significant. That was even done at her suggestion.
At the outset of the investigation, Mary Thompson went to police with information on Brown and Elstad in an attempt to throw police off her trail.
Throughout all this, of course, Mary's trying to keep her fingerprints off of everything, so she's evading responsibility. But her influence, it resulted in Aaron Itura's death.
Mary Thompson was absolutely a master manipulator. That was demonstrated many, many times.
In February 1995, Mary is charged with aggravated homicide for her role in killing Aaron Itura.
I was floored. I just had no idea that Mary could have been involved at that extent. It was just what they call a Jekyll and Hyde, you know. I felt totally betrayed by another mom.
I don't think anybody suspected when she was teaching us about gangs that she actually was planning the whole thing.
Everybody was trying to do the right thing by her and her crusades and her telling me how amazing my son was and the idea that he would go out and help her and then find out that she would have murdered my son herself.
In December 1994, Joe Brown and Jim Elstad received 10 and 16 years respectively after pleading guilty to the murder of Aaron Itura. Almost 2 years later, on June 4th, 1996, Mary Thompson goes to trial and pleads not guilty. Gang members testify in court, supporting the prosecution's case.
They all eventually, came on board and were effective witnesses.
After a 6-week trial, on July 23rd, 1996, the jury finds 41-year-old Mary Thompson guilty for her role in the murder of Aaron Itura.
It's been such an emotional trauma on us all. Because it's like, it's not only me that she's hurt, it's not only my son that she's destroyed, it's my family, his friends, the kids involved, everybody.
She's probably been doing this her whole life, but she didn't win.
Mary Thompson is sentenced to life in prison for aggravated murder, among other charges, including hindering the prosecution.
When you think of the level of deception that she perpetrated and then ultimately to see her held responsible for that, that's a real satisfying feeling as an investigator. The whole case from beginning to end was unsettling. I don't think anybody would have gone into it thought that this is how it would end.
Aaron's loved ones find relief in the closing of that dark chapter in their lives. They try their best to move forward, but thoughts of the good-natured 18-year-old are never far away.
I talked to him daily, but my family was a whole unit. You got one spoke missing. He was the protector. I always feel he's here. He's around us. He still had the courage to do the right thing. And he did the right thing in the end, even though it cost him his life.
A dedicated family man.
He was the best grandpa I could ever ask for my kids.
He loved his family. He was always there for everyone.
And a pillar of the community.
He helped a lot of the people who were down on their luck.
He was changing everyone's life.
Is senselessly murdered.
We noticed what looked like burn marks.
Is this a torture type crime? Was he actually tortured?
Detectives follow a trail of evidence.
I noticed my dad's truck was gone.
We knew that this truck was a key to solving this homicide.
That reveals devastating betrayals.
Marty would employ people from drug rehab centers.
You look at him and you're thinking that if anybody could do it, this guy could do it.
Then a surprise lead reveals a killer no one imagined.
I'll tell you guys everything I know.
No, you haven't. We're pretty excited. We're just about to go nuts. It was a moment, I'll say that.
I never thought he would do something like that.
He's not the guy I would have picked to have committed this crime.
I was in complete shock.
Ardmore, Oklahoma is an honest, hardworking town built on family values.
We're a town of about 25,000 people, and it's a wonderful community.
It's a great place to live because you can have that large town feel and then yet come home to the small town atmosphere as well.
On the evening of November 15th, 2019, that small town feeling is shattered when police respond to a 911 call.
I had just sat down to eat when the phone rang, and it was dispatch advising me that officers were out on a possible homicide.
Police are checking in on a local man who hasn't been seen or heard from in several days.
They arrived, immediately looked in the window, could see the victim was laying face down in the floor, and they could see blood. So they forced their way into the residence. They knew immediately that he was deceased.
Minutes later, homicide detectives arrive at the scene.
The living room was just in disarray. There was items kicked over. There was blood on the couch. There was blood spatter on nearby items in the living room, the TV, and pictures. And so we knew that there was a struggle that had taken place in that room.
When the detectives look at the body, they recognize the dead man.
I knew the victim. It was Marty Lucas. Most of the police officers knew who Marty was. Marty helped in the community. He helped a lot of the people who were down on their luck. Marty was a nice guy.
Detectives have to determine why 63-year-old Marty Lucas would be the target of such a heinous crime.
With the amount of trauma that Marty had suffered, it was a pretty violent, bloody scene.
You can see a lot of blood that has pooled around the body. You can see blood on the back of the body, on the head, and we knew that this was a death as a result of a beating or a blunt force trauma.
It's obvious that there was quite a struggle. Marty had hair in his hands. He had abrasions on his hands. I think he fought for his life. We noticed that there were pieces of what appeared to be a rock that had some moss on them. We found parts of it over by the couch where there was a large blood stain, and then parts of it over by him. We walked the exterior of the residence trying to find where maybe a rock would have come from. Immediately under the carport, there is a rock pathway. The walkway was missing a rock. So immediately we thought, well, whoever it was that did this took a rock from there and brought it with him. That indicated to us that this was premeditated.
And so we believe that he or she had used it as a weapon against Marty, and in the process of that, it was broken. We didn't find very large pieces of it, and so we believe that the majority of that rock was taken from the scene.
Police discover unusual markings on the body.
We noticed what looked like burn marks on his shirt, like his shirt had been ironed. My initial reaction was not only has he been hit by an iron, he's been burned by an iron.
Is this a torture type crime? Was he actually tortured? And so we believe maybe early on that the iron could have been a murder weapon, or at least an additional murder weapon in this case.
But what could have been the motive for such a violent attack?
Where his wallet would have been, someone had reached in and taken his wallet, because you could see the blood transfer, a handprint, like sliding down into his pants almost.
We were pretty clear that this was a crime involving a robbery and theft. His wallet was missing along with his phones.
Detectives make one more important observation.
We thought whoever had killed Marty knew him because there wasn't a sign of forced entry.
As investigators work, Marty's son Michael arrives at the scene.
I went to his house. It was a nightmare. It's the worst day of my life. I was in shock once I seen what was actually inside.
My husband called me. He said, "My dad's dead. Someone killed him." And he was just screaming in my ear. He's like, "I can't believe someone would kill my dad." I was in complete shock. He was such a nice person. Who would want to hurt him?
Marty Lucas was born into a military family in 1956. After graduating high school, Marty got married and had 2 children, Jennifer and Michael.
Michael and his dad were very, very close.
He loved his family. He was always there for everyone, you know. He made sure to make time for everyone. I used to call him Papa Smurf because he's just really funny. He's short. He's just a real, bubbly person. My parents, they divorced when I was pretty young.
Marty had struggles when my husband was a child and teenager.
He had a substance abuse problem.
He had been in and out of trouble with the police, petty crimes that was a result of that addiction.
In 2007, Marty got a second chance when he was offered a job as a carpenter and found renewed purpose in life.
From then on, he straightened up and started his own business. Did really well.
He turned his life around. He was one of the few success stories that I'm aware of in my career.
Marty threw everything into rebuilding his life and his family.
He taught me a lot of work-related skills at an early age. He let me start working with him when I was 12 years old. And my son, he's 8. He's already starting working him, basically, showing him skills like he did me when I was young.
He was the best grandpa I could ever ask for my kids.
Marty never forgot the second chance he'd been given and vowed to pay it forward.
Marty would usually go to the halfway houses and get people that had just got out of jail or that have a hard time with their life and see if they would want to work for him.
Basically, just giving workers second chances. He knew where they was coming from. He's been in their shoes.
He taught these men and women new skills. He treated them with the utmost respect.
Now investigators are left asking, who would want to bludgeon this well-respected contractor and caring grandfather to death?
He really had no enemies, and just to see that the way that he died was so brutal, it was very difficult to know that someone would be capable of doing something like that.
As detectives finish up at the crime scene, they turn to Marty's son, who gives them a crucial lead.
When I showed up, I noticed that my dad's truck was gone. That really threw me off because he wouldn't even let me drive his truck. He wouldn't loan the truck out to no one.
It was a Chevy pickup that originally had belonged to Marty's father. That truck was everything to him.
Detectives put out a bolo, or be on the lookout for the missing truck.
We needed to find the truck and maybe hope that either the suspect was still driving it or that they left behind evidence that we could identify him.
We knew that this truck was a key to solving this homicide.
Investigators ask Marty's loved ones who they think would have seen him last.
We found out that Marty had been missing 2 or 3 days prior to the Friday the 15th that we found his body. And one of the things we were told by family and friends is that Marty goes to this Valero gas station every morning to get coffee.
The Valero had video that pointed down the street that the crime occurred on.
The manager said that Marty had arrived last at that store on Tuesday morning.
Detectives searched the security footage. On the day after Marty was last seen alive, and 3 days before his body was found, the truck appears.
Marty's truck was very unique, dark green color with custom wheels. This green truck was in a big hurry and it pulled out in front of a semi-truck and it was almost in an accident that we had captured on video.
Investigators need to track down Marty's truck and whoever is behind the wheel.
We thought if we find the truck, we're probably going to find our suspect. This is going to be our guy.
Coming up, detectives uncover suspects with dark pasts.
They said, he's violent. I thought, good Lord, he gets violent. I don't know what I'm going to do.
She had frequented a lot of the local casinos.
She knew he had large sums of cash.
This was the break that we needed.
And the trail leads to an unlikely killer.
You're not going to think that this is someone who could kill somebody. That kind of broke open a whole new layer of the case.
The investigation took off at warp speed because we think we've got our guy.
Police investigating the murder of 63-year-old contractor Marty Lucas have obtained gas station surveillance video of someone driving his truck the day after he was last seen.
We collected hours and hours of video from the store. We were able to piece together some events that happened before and after the homicide.
The footage shows a busy street a few blocks from Marty's house. When detectives scour the rest of the security tapes, something grabs their attention.
On Wednesday morning, just after daylight, you can see a gentleman walking from the direction of Motel 6. And that person was walking towards Marty's home.
Is this unidentified man involved in Marty's murder?
You can see the suspect. Then an hour later, you can see on the video that there's one guy in the truck, that there's a single person in the truck.
And so we thought he might be the same person that was in that video. Marty did not allow just anyone to drive this truck. In fact, he did not allow anyone to drive this truck. We had to follow the stolen truck. That was really going to be our key to solving this case.
While officers continue their search for the truck, detectives return to speak to Marty's family and friends.
That's one of the things we were trying to just nail down is, who has Marty been hanging out with lately? Who has he been working with? Who has he had problems with, if anyone?
Police learn that along with helping people back up on their feet, Marty often forged friendships with those he employed.
Marty would become close with some of the men that he worked with or that he would hire and try to get to know them.
There's probably about 6 or 7 of them I actually got pretty close to. He built up friendships with them.
Amanda and Jason, Marty's neighbors, were very close to him. Amanda used to work for Marty because she paints very well.
He didn't look down on me for, I was trying to get my life back on track. And he told me he did it, so you can do it.
Marty would bring a lot of these folks to family dinners or get-togethers. He tried to bring them into his family.
But now, police want to know, had Marty's generosity and business exposed him to danger?
He paid all of his people in cash. And that's just the way it is in the day laborers with those guys. They need money that day, so they're going to work. And everything's cash.
To know that he could pay them daily with cash and help them out may have led to his demise.
Police also discover not all Marty's employees felt like part of the family.
It wasn't an easy road for Marty because sometimes he would have to tell them that they couldn't work for him anymore because they would steal from him.
Anytime you're working with people who have drug and alcohol problems, it's not uncommon for them to steal from their employers. And Marty had faced some of that. He wasn't afraid to stand up to these people. He would tell them, if you mess up, you're gone.
So our list of suspects was a mile long. We were given several names, but yeah, it was so difficult for investigators because it was going to be hard to track them down. Where they were staying, they usually don't keep jobs very long.
As detectives begin tracking down Marty's current and former employees, they ask his neighbor if anyone had a grudge against him.
Well, I initially went to interview Amanda, and she said, over the last month or so, there's been some rough-looking characters over there.
1 month before his death, he had been hanging out with these new people, and they were helping him work on his truck and then had to redo the job.
She thought maybe there had been some anger issues between the victim and those guys.
The day they were there working, Marty seemed to be pacing back and forth like they were taking too long. And he didn't want to, leave them at his house. They were making too big of a mess. He was upset about that.
Amanda didn't know the men, but had overheard Marty talk to the man in charge.
One was a guy named Junior, and so this was someone that we wanted to speak with.
There's just one problem.
We did not know who Junior was.
We knew this to be probably a nickname, and that's all we really knew.
While detectives plan to search for Junior, Amanda also provides them with the name of another one of Marty's former employees.
Marty met Chris Dyer at Valero, the local convenience store that he went to nearly every morning to get a cup of coffee. Chris had recently been fired from that store, had a falling out with the owner, and Marty had employed him.
I know Chris Dyer had worked for Marty, had been fired from there for drug use.
He'd had a criminal past. He'd been arrested and had an addiction problem with drugs and alcohol.
Officers speak with the owner of the Valero station where Chris once worked.
The owner-manager of the Valero store reaffirmed that Chris was just not a very good guy, that he had had trouble employing him, and so he felt like that he needed to let Chris go because there was always drama, that Chris was basically just at rock bottom and desperate for money. Chris Dyer knew that Marty carried several $100s. When he paid him for a job, he would pay him at the end of the day, and he would pay him with cash.
Was Chris Dyer desperate enough to bludgeon Marty Lucas to death?
We were thinking that maybe it was a robbery gone bad, knowing that Marty had this money in his home because he was down on his luck and needed money for drugs. And so there was a lot of questions concerning Chris Dyer. One of our main priorities early on in the investigation is to find this subject named Junior, along with Chris Dyer. And so we wanted to talk to these people.
So we need to locate Junior, and we needed to talk to Kristen as quickly as possible.
Police investigating the murder of contractor Marty Lucas are chasing multiple leads as they search for his killer and stolen truck. They've set their sights on two of Marty's employees, an unidentified man called Junior and a recently fired laborer named Chris Dyer.
A lot of these folks who are going through tough times, there is nothing permanent in their lives. There is nothing fixed in their lives. There is no stability. And so it was hard to track them down.
Following a lead, police questioned employees at the gas station where Chris had worked.
I spoke with the clerk that was on duty at the Valero, and she was able to give me a phone number to Gina Dyer. Gina is Chris's estranged wife.
She and Chris had been separated about a month because she had caught him cheating. He had gone back to drug use, and that he was currently living at the Econo Lodge Hotel.
Detectives find Chris at the hotel and bring him in for an interview.
We really thought that we had something. We knew that Chris had easy access to Marty's home. Chris Dyer knew that Marty carried up to $500 to $600 in cash on him at any given point in time.
So there's a rumor that some rumors went around that maybe you and him had gotten crossways and he had basically fired you. So y'all never had a disagreement?
No, not at all. Nope. And I'd like to know who in the hell's saying that, because that's bullshit. Pardon my French.
Police know better than to trust Chris's word.
We knew that Chris Dyer is down on his luck and had run-ins with the law, and well, maybe this is our killer. This is who it is. And then you get him in an interview room and he's cooperative and he's genuine. In fact, he was very distraught over Marty's death.
I hope you catch who the hell did it and fry their ass.
Yeah, I know, right?
But he was man, that guy would do anything for anybody. He had some empathy there because he'd been in trouble before too. And damn sure didn't deserve to go out like that.
I think he considered Marty a friend, even though Marty had fired him.
Would you be willing for us to go through your truck, look through your hotel room, to see if there's anything that would be...
Yeah, I got
that we can roll you out?
Marty had what we would consider defensive wounds to the hands. There was hair and blood under the fingernails of the body. And so we knew that there was some type of altercation. We knew that there had to be injuries on our suspect or suspects. And Chris had none of that. He had no recent cuts or bruises.
In order to officially rule Chris out as a suspect, detectives checked Chris's alibi.
He said he had gone to Kingston, Oklahoma, which is nearby, with Krista, his girlfriend. I believe it was the Wednesday before.
Police bring Krista in for an interview.
Is it possible that he slipped out of the room one night while you were sleeping, left, went and did something?
No. I'd have to say that just could not be possible.
His girlfriend also corroborated Chris's timeline as to what his story was. He had an alibi for that timeline, but he just didn't appear to be involved.
With nothing to link Chris to the murder, police are forced to let him go. Investigators hope Marty's preliminary autopsy report will provide more leads.
The significant thing for us from the autopsy was the fact the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, including the large gash to his head. Obviously, he was hit with something other than the rock because of the laceration on his head and because of the burn marks.
These burns that was on his back and part of his right arm came back as a post-mortem burns, which was very interesting to us, which means that they were caused after Marty had passed away. Initially, we were looking at these burns to the body as being type of a torture. Now, we believe the iron was used as a secondary weapon after. So the suspect didn't realize that. In his rage, he didn't know that Marty had already died, and he continued to hit him with this iron.
The preliminary autopsy report doesn't conclude whether the rock or iron ultimately killed Marty, and an exact time of death remains undetermined. Meanwhile, with the killer still at large, the worry takes a toll on Marty's family.
His son, Michael's always a quiet person, but he was like a walking zombie.
I couldn't sleep at night. I'd stay up during the day. It's fear for my family. Just because, I had no clue who would do this to my dad.
Michael was really panicked. Marty had so many different men working with him. I was very fearful of my life.
As police continue their search for other suspects, including the former employee Junior who worked on Marty's truck, a lead comes in about someone close to Marty who might have had a motive.
One of Marty's friends had called one of our patrol officers and told him that Marty was dating a lady named Darna Hargrave.
So Donna Hargrave is somebody that probably everybody at the Ardmore Police Department is familiar with and knows on site.
We knew Donna had a drug problem as well. She did have a few run-ins with police and frequented a lot of the local casinos.
Could Donna's vices have pushed her to murder Marty?
She knew Marty and knew that he had large sums of cash, and because she is a known drug user, that perhaps she had enlisted the assistance of another known drug user to go rob Marty. That was a scenario, obviously had some possibility to it. That's why we needed to talk to Donna as quickly as possible.
Officers bring Donna down to the police department for an interview.
Upon bringing her into the interview room, she was handcuffed, and I knew that she had not come up there willingly.
What's this about? Yes, if I'm not under arrest, then why do y'all have a reason to search me?
She was really uncooperative. She did not want to speak to us.
Okay, what is this about? Please speak this over with and tell me what it's about.
Okay, so...
Somebody who I've been hanging with.
Yeah.
Okay, who?
Marty Lucas.
Alright, that people. And that's straight up.
She definitely has a problem with Marty that was very suspicious, and it really struck a nerve in us because we wanted to know what this problem is.
Two days after finding the body of 63-year-old Marty Lucas, police are interviewing his former girlfriend, Donna Hargrave, a woman with a long criminal history and a grudge against Marty.
She had been arrested many times here in Ardmore. She had been known to be at least uncooperative with police, if not somewhat violent and unruly.
She didn't really care too much for Marty. We thought maybe she had something to do with his death.
He pissed me off because he was just being a dickhead.
So when you said f*** him, what are you mad at him about?
He just promised things and y'all never fall through. Like I talked to Marty about moving my trailer over to him. Over to his house or something. He said no.
He knew that she had not been clean and that she had not been trying to straighten up and that he wasn't going to help her as long as she wasn't trying to help herself.
Could Marty's rejection have led Donna to do something unthinkable?
So if I were to tell you something bad happened to Marty, what would you say?
What do you mean? What's wrong with him?
Well, if I were to tell you he was dead, someone did something to him, what would you say about that?
Are you serious?
Yeah. Yeah, that's why you're here.
This was a girl that was very hardened, and for her to break down and to cry and was very genuinely upset over Marty's death.
She did say that they had recently broken up and that she hadn't seen him anytime in the last 4, 5, 7 days.
Can you kind of start like maybe Wednesday morning, tell me where you were, what you did, where you went?
At my mom's and I slept all day.
Okay.
And we were able to pretty quickly corroborate where she had been.
It was unlikely that she had anything to do with his death. However, we did not rule her out immediately.
Days after Marty's gruesome death, his family and friends come together to say their goodbyes.
Marty's funeral was amazing. It was very, very sad, though, because everyone who knew him knew that he didn't deserve anything ever bad to happen to him. Everyone loved Marty. Everyone.
There was quite a bit of his workers, even his past workers, that come to his funeral. It was a good day, but a bad day at the same time.
Meanwhile, police doggedly follow each and every lead.
We did have a large suspect pool because we didn't know who all might have been working for Marty. One of the things that we wanted to get identified was who Junior was that was working on the truck. So myself and another investigator said, we'll run by the halfway houses and see if we can get Junior identified. So we went over to the Broadway house, and the director there gave us the name of Clarence Bibb Jr. He said he thought Jr. was from up by Oklahoma City, and he's got a pretty extensive record, including some assault. Well, we really believe that if Jr. and Marty had gotten into an altercation over the payment of the truck motor, maybe he took the money, it got out of hand, he killed Marty, took Marty's money and the truck, and took it back to Oklahoma City to chop it up.
We found that law enforcement there knew Clarence very well. They knew his family very well. And they lived in several homes that would be described as a compound, like a family compound.
And they said, don't go out there without a lot of us. Clarence is violent, and so you don't go up there by yourself.
Detectives assemble a task force with local and state police and make the 2-hour drive to Junior's compound.
When I first got out there, I thought, man, this is a real possibility. Man, we might find our truck out here. So we went up and knocked on the door. And when Clarence showed up, I thought, good Lord, this is one large man. And if he gets violent, I don't know what I'm going to do. You look at him and you see what had happened to Marty. You're thinking that if anybody could do it, this guy could do it. I mean, he's big.
Detectives ask if he and Marty had fallen out over the work Junior had done on Marty's truck.
And he was happy with what Marty had paid him, and there was no disagreement.
He said that Marty paid him $500 more than he was supposed to because of the trouble that we went through.
And in fact, when I told him that Marty had died and that someone had caused his death, he too got emotional. Here, this big, mean, gruff country guy, and he's crying like a child over his friend's death.
He said, I wouldn't hurt Marty if somebody paid me to. He said he considered Marty a mentor and a friend.
Clarence denied that he had been in Ardmore recently. He had gave an alibi that he had been at home with his mom and other family members around the time of Marty's death, and they corroborated his story that he was there. He fully cooperated with the investigation. He gave us his cell phone.
He let us have clothing and boots. He let us search his house. He let us search the property. And he let us just have free reign of whatever we wanted.
And we came up with nothing. I just remember thinking to myself, man, we are absolutely going nowhere with this investigation.
With nothing to link Junior to the homicide, detectives begin to fear the investigation is cooling down.
We had a pretty good idea that it wasn't Junior at that point. Donna Hargrave had a stone-clad alibi. Chris Dyer just didn't appear to be involved. I think both Bryce and I just were disheartened. We had no leads. We had no suspects. So we were just trying to figure out, where do we go from here?
Then, an unexpected call turns the case red hot.
Well, we got back to the station, and dispatch yells down to us, "Hey, they found your truck." We were dead tired, but you went from dead tired to wide awake in a hurry.
Four days into the investigation of Marty Lucas's murder, detectives get the break they were looking for: Marty's missing truck.
And I remember the dispatcher telling me they found the truck. And I said, where is it? And they said in Springdale, Arkansas. And so this was the break that we needed.
We're pretty excited. We're just about to go nuts. We're like, okay, get a hold of Springdale police, get them on the phone, let's find out what we got going on. It was a moment, I'll say that.
Investigators ask Springdale police how Marty's truck had ended up over 300 miles away.
A citizen had called and told them that his friend had been in possession of the truck. And his friend, he identified as Jack Latham.
But who is Jack Latham? Detectives immediately ask Marty's family if they know the name. They learn Jack was one of Marty's most trusted laborers who hadn't been seen or heard from in months.
Jack Latham, he worked for my dad for a long time. He was a really hard worker.
Marty was extremely good to Jack. He gave him extra money here and there whenever he'd need it. Marty would bring him by my house sometimes, and they would occasionally ride around together. He seemed very quiet.
It was not unusual for people to come and go in Marty's business. Jack Latham worked for him on and off a couple of years prior to this.
When detectives dig into Jack's background, they learn he has a daughter and ex-wife in Ardmore and a checkered past.
He had an extensive criminal history for drugs and theft, but he's not the guy I would have picked to have committed this crime.
Jack Latham did minor misdemeanor type crimes, drug possession type crimes, but this is not a person that would even be on the radar because he had no really violent history.
So you're not going to think that this is a guy who could kill somebody, particularly not in the manner in which Marty was killed.
Investigators rush to Arkansas, where police have taken Jack into custody and seized the truck. But before speaking with Jack, they interview the man who first contacted police about the truck, Jack's friend, Raymond.
Raymond, he says to us that out of the blue, Jack calls on Friday night and says that he has got court on Monday. Can he stay for the weekend?
Raymond tells police Jack asked to get picked up at a local parking lot.
So he goes to pick him up, and he sees he's sitting in what looks like a pretty nice Chevy pickup. And he says, hey, whose pickup is that? He said, oh, it's a guy that I'm visiting. He let me come sit in it to wait on you. And he says to us, I didn't believe him. Monday morning, Jack says, just take me to jail. I've got warrants. So he takes him to jail, and then he goes back home and he looks to see what the warrants are for, and it's for theft. And he thinks, I wonder if that truck's stolen, because something doesn't feel right with that truck. So he goes back to where the parking lot where the truck is and sees it doesn't have tags on it.
And so Raymond knew that Jack was lying. He knew he needed to call the police.
We went and looked at the truck, and the truck looked pristine on the inside. But when we sprayed it with Blue Star, there was blood everywhere.
We knew in the back of our minds that this was the key, that Jack Latham was the key to Marty Lucas's death.
And then the investigation took off at warp speed because, yeah, we think we've got our guy.
We went to the Benton County Jail and interviewed Jack that day.
First thing I noticed about him is he's slight of build. He's not very big. He seems to be very reserved and meek. He doesn't seem to be what I would picture to be a killer.
Then police noticed something else about Jack's appearance.
He looked pretty bad. He had some injuries to his face. He had this greenish brown black eye or injury to his eye. He had a minor abrasion to his lip.
Could Jack have suffered his injuries while attacking his former boss, Marty? Police start by asking Jack when he was in Ardmore last.
Okay. I guess at some point in time you've been in Ardmore, been around Ardmore, or living in Ardmore or something. Yeah, a long time ago, about 6 years ago.
Jack tells detectives he's recently been living 200 miles away in Enid, Oklahoma.
Who were you staying with? My brother and them.
Then, investigators cut to the chase.
We've been working on an investigation for the last almost a week now. Your name's come up. And before I can really get into a lot of questions with you and details and explain to you, why we're here and all that, I got to read you your Miranda rights.
After we Mirandized him, he said he didn't want to talk to us anymore.
Do you wish to make a statement, or will you answer any questions that we have for you today? No? Okay.
With Jack refusing to talk, police need to find a way to place him near Marty's house at the time of the murder.
So, in his initial interview, he tells us that he hasn't been to Ardmore, that he came down here from his brother's house in Enid. I called Enid PD, and they went out, they talked with the brother, they talked with the brother's wife. They said, yes, he has been here at our house.
But then detectives get a stunning piece of information Jack hadn't shared.
His brother's wife said I'd put him on the bus to go see his wife and daughter in Ardmore on the Monday morning before Marty had been killed. So we knew he had gotten to Ardmore. The next day we got a hold of the bus and found out that yes, indeed, he had been at Ardmore.
With Jack still in custody, police drive back to Ardmore.
The detectives got a search warrant and looked through Jack's phone, and that led them to his ex-wife and daughter.
Did you see your dad in the truck last week?
No.
Okay. Do you understand what kind of trouble your dad's possibly in? He's been detained as a suspect in a homicide. So you for sure haven't seen your dad since he's been in Ardmore?
Investigators talk to Jack's ex-wife, Teresa, next.
Has he came to visit you lately? No?
But I haven't seen from him or heard from him.
So would it surprise you to know that Jack is involved in a homicide here in Ardmore?
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like him.
Both of them said they haven't seen Jack. He hadn't been in Ardmore. They don't know what we're talking about.
And we knew this was not true because on Jack's phone, we knew that he had called Teresa and Shelby.
And during that interview with Teresa, I laid it out for her. I just flat out told her I knew she was lying.
I'm not saying anything. I've told you guys everything I know.
No, you haven't.
Yes, sir, I have.
No, you haven't. And we can prove it. It's a matter of time before we put you in that truck. We put you in that truck, it starts getting serious in a real quick hurry.
Police start to question if Jack's ex-wife and daughter are involved in Marty's murder.
At that point, she decided that she didn't want to talk to us anymore, and she and Shelby left. And I just told her, we're not going to stop. We're going to solve this crime with or without you. The only question is, what's your role going to be?
Less than 24 hours later, police get a call.
The next day, early morning, the next morning, Teresa called, said, I want to come back and talk. So from that, I mean, that kind of broke open a whole new layer of the case.
Police investigating the murder of Marty Lucas are trying to place his friend and employee, Jack Latham, at the scene of the crime.
We knew that he was coming here to visit his wife and daughter.
They both told investigators that they did not know where Jack was. They had not seen Jack. He had not been in Ardmore.
But Jack's daughter and ex-wife returned to the police station the next day.
Yesterday, you were pretty firm that you didn't know nothing.
I was really scared and I thought about it all night and I felt really bad. Really hit home, so I had to tell the truth. I did see Jack on the 11th and 12th.
Which was what, Monday and Tuesday?
Monday and Tuesday.
Okay.
And he dropped us off at my mom's house on the 13th in the morning.
Teresa says Jack stayed at an Ardmore motel on Monday and Tuesday nights.
They said Jack had called Marty to see if he had any work for him. And Marty said, no, I can't use you. I don't need you right now.
And do you know what day that was?
Tuesday night?
They both said that about 8 or 8:30 on that Wednesday morning, Jack left, sent an officer to Motel 6 to see if they had video. And sure enough, we've got video of Jack Latham leaving Motel 6, wearing the same clothes as the person that's walking. The Bolero camera picks up.
About an hour later, a green Chevrolet truck that we believe was Marty's truck shows up in the parking lot in Motel 6.
You watch him go over to a dumpster, throw something in the dumpster, which we believe was the rock and the iron. Where did he go get the truck?
He said his friend gave it to him.
Then, Jack did something even more suspicious.
When he came in, he went straight to the sink and washed his hands. He did wipe his face down, and he put his hoodie on, and he told me that he did something bad, but he wouldn't tell me what.
He said, we gotta leave, we gotta get out of here. He drops them off, and they don't see him again.
And so by then, we got enough to file charges on Jack Latham.
I called the family members and told them what we knew.
I was very shocked because Jack had been in my house around my children. He just acted very shy, but he didn't act like he would hurt anyone.
It was shocking to me because he treated Jack with respect like he did everyone else.
Police charged Jack Latham with first-degree murder and extradite him from Arkansas. When he arrives in Ardmore, Jack starts talking.
Jack told me that he was in desperate need of money. He had no job. He needed money for drugs. And he knew that Marty Lucas was the source of that money. Marty had told him no, that he knew that he wasn't clean. His story was that a physical altercation occurred, that he took a rock paperweight from the kitchen table, struck Marty with it, that in his words, he freaked out, took the keys to the truck and a few $100s from the wallet and left the area.
Jack denies attacking Marty with a stone from outside or the iron.
There were some aspects where he seemed to truly be confused about what had happened because he was strung out on drugs, including, was there an iron used?
So what had really happened? Police have their own theory as to how the murder played out.
We believe that this was premeditated.
I think he went to Marty's house, and I think he picked that rock up on the outside of the house and he knocked on the door. Because I don't think he was going to take no for an answer. And when Marty told him no, a fight ensued in which he struck Marty with the rock. I think Marty fought back. He struck him with the iron, which was readily available, and then burned him with it, whether on purpose or on accident. He took the iron and he took the rock with him, and he disposed of the evidence, and he drove to Arkansas.
It was absolutely senseless over a few $100s.
Despite the evidence, prosecutors worry defense lawyers will try to argue Jack was desperate and never planned to kill Marty.
I thought that this case met the elements from a legal standpoint of first-degree murder, but then you have to be mindful of the fact that a jury would think also Jack's explanation is somewhat believable. He's a hopeless junkie. He's desperate for money.
With the family's consent, prosecutors charged Jack with second-degree murder.
We didn't want to risk going to trial and then letting him free.
In October 2020, Jack Latham pleads guilty and is sentenced to 25 years in prison.
I feel like we got justice. I know he's going to be locked up and my family's going to be safe.
Jack was very unexpected as a killer because he just didn't act like he was that type of person.
Jack Latham, he's still a mystery to me, because just by being around him, I never thought he would do something like that.
He did this for nothing. There was no reason for nothing.
Marty was such a nice guy. But not only that, think of all the people whose lives he affected in a positive way. That's a sense of loss for our community.
When I lost Marty, I lost my life too. He was the most amazing person I could ever. Sorry.
Despite Marty's horrific death, the legacy of his compassion lives on.
My dad, he'd be very proud of the lives that he's changed in the community.
It made me appreciate everything about Marty and the second chances he gave to everybody, because it made me feel like I should give people second chances.
A woman enjoying retirement after a lifetime of hard work.
My mother did very well for herself. She was a very strong-willed woman.
Nina was quirky. I can't tell you how much she loved frogs and Elvis Presley and country music. She just marched to her own drum and did her thing.
Found brutally murdered in her home.
He stabbed her 24 times.
There was blood throughout the house.
It's like living in a bad horror movie.
A dangerous predator eludes police.
She had been sexually assaulted. Our victim potentially knew who the suspect was.
I kept asking them, is this going to be a cold case? And they kept telling me, we're not done yet.
DNA evidence leads to a shocking realization.
It was a match to another murder.
The thought that we had a serial killer here in town scared the hell out of me.
And a suspect no one saw coming.
To call this an unexpected killer is an understatement.
That's like every person's nightmare.
It hit me like a ton of bricks.
Kansas City is a large metropolitan area on the border between Kansas and Missouri.
Kansas City can be a very fun place to be. We love our sports in this city. It's a very friendly place to live.
Nothing seems out of the ordinary on October 29th, 2010, until Kansas City police receive a 911 call about a woman found unresponsive in her home.
A woman called police and said she discovered her mother at the bottom of the basement stairs, and she checked her for vital signs and found she was dead.
When the first officer arrives on the scene, the caller leads them to her 75-year-old mother, Nina Whitney.
I showed them my mother's body laying at the bottom of the stairs. I told the police officers I believe she had just dropped over from a heart attack. And then I called my cousin Kim.
The phone rang and I picked it up, and Paige told me my mother is dead. Paige said she thought maybe Aunt Nina fell down the stairs going to the garage.
While Paige speaks with her cousin on the phone, police take a closer look at Nina's body.
Nina was face down, and there was a shelving unit there with a bunch of glass frogs, and a lot of those frogs had fallen off the shelf on top of her. It initially looks like an accident and a natural death.
but when they rolled the victim over, they discovered several stab wounds in her chest. And also what were determined were defensive wounds on her hands, which is something that we see when someone fights back.
Clearly, this is no accident, and detectives arrive to begin a homicide investigation.
When someone's stabbed like the victim was, it usually means there's some sort of emotion tied there because you're actually stabbing someone instead of just shooting them or something like that. Her blouse had been pulled up and there were buttons missing, and they quickly discovered that they're what they believed to be saliva on her breast, which they swabbed. So it felt like this was sort of a sexual in nature homicide.
Police inform Paige that her mother has been murdered.
I don't think I've ever been that stunned in my entire life. It's so surreal. It's like living in a bad horror movie. I don't know how to describe it. You're just totally and completely stunned.
A lifelong native of the Midwest, Nina Whitney was a woman with humble roots.
My mother was born in South Dakota, and then their family wound up here in Kansas City in the late 40s, early 50s. My mother had a very rough life. My mom's mom left their family, so my mom was left to take care of her younger siblings. She married my father, and my parents divorced when I was about 9 years old. My father left her pretty much destitute, so it was just the two of us. And we struggled tremendously. My mother worked some very hard jobs, and we lived on food stamps.
Eventually, Nina found a stable, well-paying career.
She worked on the assembly line at General Motors here in Kansas City. She managed to buy a house, and she did very well for herself. She was a very strong-willed woman.
Nina wanted a better life for her daughter and encouraged Paige to get an education.
I went into criminal justice at Central Missouri State University, and I was a probation parole officer for 25 years. The older I became, the closer my mother and I became. We spent a tremendous amount of time together. My mother started collecting frogs back in the mid-70s. Ceramic, glass, dishes, clothes, bedding, towels. The entire house was filled, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, with frogs.
Nina's favorite hobby earned her the nickname the Frog Lady.
Nina was quirky. I can't tell you how much she loved frogs and Elvis Presley and country music. She just marched to her own drum and did her thing.
Investigators are stunned that someone would viciously attack this 75-year-old woman in her home.
I was in total shock, truly. She was in her house, minding her own business, not doing anything wrong. Like, how on earth did that happen?
When I found out Nina had been killed, I couldn't imagine who could have done this. I had no ideas.
Detectives interviewed Paige to narrow down when the murder might have taken place.
Friday, at about 6:45, I decided to call my mother to see what time she wanted to go shopping on Saturday. And that's when she didn't answer the phone. It was extremely unusual for her not to answer the phone. So then I called the cell phone, and she didn't answer that either. Then I started to panic. So then I took off and went out south toward her house. And when I got to her house, the porch light was not on. And I knew something was very wrong. So I walked through to the kitchen, and it was dark. So I turned the light on, and there was her body laying at the bottom of the stairs. And I could feel the back of her head, and her head was ice cold. And I called 911, and then it just kind of hit me out of the blue that I was hearing weird noises. So I followed the noise upstairs to the hall bathroom. Both faucets in the tub were running full blast. And I thought, well, that's just really strange, because my mother didn't use that bathroom.
Detectives wonder if Nina's killer had turned on the faucets, and if so, why?
The victim's daughter had located the guest bathroom bathtub faucets running, and she had turned those faucets off. So the bathroom was processed for fingerprints and DNA.
In the victim's bedroom, there was like an imprint of where it looked like somebody had been laying on the comforter.
And near the bed, we could see buttons that appeared to be similar to the victim's blouse. as well as a hair roller that was similar to the hair rollers in the victim's hair. So that led us to believe that the victim was assaulted and maybe her blouse may have been torn open at that location.
As every corner of the house is searched for evidence, investigators make a crucial discovery.
We opened up the knife drawer in the kitchen and located a paring knife where the blade was bent and there was blood at the base of the blade near the handle. That could mean that somebody had tried to wipe it clean.
Forensics bagged the knife for further analysis and processed the house with luminol, which can indicate the presence of blood.
The luminol tells us that somebody was moving around in that house with some amount of blood on them. We got that blue glow in the victim's bedroom, bathroom, hallway, living room, and the kitchen.
The front door was unlocked, and we didn't find any sign of forced entry, which was a big clue for us that our victim potentially knew who the suspect was.
There's no reason for anyone to hurt her. And my mother was not a very social person at all. She had no family other than me here in town that would be in and out of the house.
Paige points to one detail detectives could not have determined from their search.
There was a shelf by the front door where her cell phone always was, so she could take it when she went out the front door, and it was missing.
Had the killer snatched Nina's cell phone? Police request a trace on it, while officers go door to door looking for witnesses.
One of my other detectives found a party down the street that had seen a white male in the neighborhood earlier that day. He was in his 50s, walking with a limp. The witness saw him go to a black Jeep. He saw that car was parked kind of behind the house, about a block away. And so he sees this guy walking and kind of looking around. And so he just kind of mentally noted it. He kind of looked like he was probably up to no good.
Could the suspicious man be Nina Whitney's killer? As they start to track him down, detectives catch a break.
We found that Nina's phone was still on and still being used in South Kansas City. We were able to do surveillance and observe the person using our victim's cell phone.
Coming up, a break in the case reveals a potential serial killer.
We had another homicide.
There were zip ties that have been used for bindings.
He's terrorized an entire community.
And a grieving daughter takes matters into her own hands.
I did feel a need to help them investigate my mother's homicide.
If she didn't get the answers, then she kept asking.
In my gut, I just knew that was him.
Detectives investigating the vicious stabbing of 75-year-old Nina Whitney believe the killer stole her cell phone. Now, police have traced the phone to an address in South Kansas City and rush to apprehend the suspect.
We did kick his door in, and when we took the suspect into custody, we found that he had the phone on his person.
The suspect goes by the nickname Lil Mickey. Police demand to know how he came into possession of a murdered woman's cell phone.
He told us he was walking down the street pretty close to our victim's house and found that phone laying in the grass. He said he didn't make the most money in the world and was just glad to have a cell phone that was working and started using the cell phone.
Skeptical of his story, investigators ask him if he killed Nina Whitney.
Little Mickey adamantly denied being involved in any sort of violence with our victim or anything where someone was harmed or killed. We asked him, could you have bought this phone off somebody else? Did you get it from a person?
Despite hours of questioning, Lil Mickey stands by his story.
His story was, I found the phone there in the grass and picked it up.
Police want to know his whereabouts at the time of the murder.
Based on her lights being off in the house, we believe Nina's murder happened during daylight hours. And he did provide an alibi, a female that he had been with that day.
Investigators have no grounds to detain Little Mickey any longer, but they obtain a sample of his DNA just in case.
He wouldn't seem like he would have a motive to commit this type of crime, but we still had to do our due diligence.
The next day, police track down the woman he used as his alibi.
So we talked to her. The information she was able to provide, it matched up with what he had been saying.
With Lil Mickey looking unlikely as the killer, detectives turned back to the theory that Nina knew her attacker.
It was obvious that she had let someone in the house because there was absolutely no forced entry.
We had to look at Nina's history and try to figure out who she would have let into the house. And we also had the witness that had seen a white male in the neighborhood. My supervisor thought that a composite sketch would be a good thing to pursue in this case. The witness willingly came down to police headquarters and met with our sketch artist. She sat with him and gave a pretty good-looking composite sketch of what he believed the party looked like that he saw that day. We showed Paige that picture, and she looked at it for a long time, but didn't necessarily jog her memory about who it could possibly be.
The individual did not look familiar to me at all. I could not for the life of me think of anyone who fit that description.
Investigators can't be certain if the man seen by Nina's neighbor is the killer. But with few quality leads, police decide to release the sketch to the media.
I was the publisher and editor of the Cass County Democrat-Missourian. We all know that police sketches are an unexact science. However, I think they can be very useful. So we had run the sketch in the newspaper to put that sketch out to a larger audience.
As the sketch goes public, detectives work with Paige to come up with a list of people that Nina would have had a reason to let into her home.
She'd had quite a bit of work done on the house in the last year or so there had been lots of people in and out working on the house.
Maybe someone that is a predator did work inside her house and decided that she would be a good victim. Paige went back into Nina's home and went through all of her records to show us dates and times when she had stuff done at her house.
The detectives got all that information from me and questioned everyone who had been in and out of that house.
My squad started working to collect DNA from anyone that we thought had contact with Nina. And I think we collected about 40 to 50 samples. Honestly, most people were willing to provide their DNA to us when we explained that this was an elderly woman that was brutally murdered. If there was someone that maybe we thought was fishy or involved or could potentially be the suspect, DNA is good to rule people out in cases like this.
The forensics lab will compare the scores of samples to the DNA recovered from Nina's body.
It'd be nice as a detective to get DNA results like they do on TV, 5 seconds later. But it was about a month after the homicide when we got our results back. My boss called me and she said that we had a DNA hit. So I thought that, if there's a DNA hit, then we'll be able to find a suspect. But that wasn't the case because it was unknown DNA.
The DNA does not match the dozens of samples collected by homicide investigators.
Everything from the mailman to Little Mickey to contractors that had been inside her house. It rules them out absolutely. But the DNA profile that was found was a match to another murder almost 2 years to the day in Harrisonville, Missouri. So we knew at that point that this was not the first time that this suspect did this. And that wasn't something I expected. It was a big deal. What concerned us was that we did have a serial killer type situation.
One month after the murder of Nina Whitney, DNA taken from the crime scene as matched to another homicide in the national database.
It was a match to another unsolved murder in Harrisonville, Missouri. It's a smaller town, about an hour south of Kansas City. Kara Jo Roberts was found inside her home in the bathtub, shot in the head with the bathtub running, just like Nina. It seemed like a sexually motivated homicide, and with the tub running, that matches Nina at our scene.
Police decide to keep this explosive new information under wraps.
At that point, we were trying to keep this information close to the chest. because the suspect didn't know that we knew both crime scenes were connected. We did not want that in the public.
Detectives even withhold this new development from the victims' loved ones, including Paige.
I kept asking them, when is this going to be a cold case? And they kept telling me, well, not yet. We're not done yet. And I don't know what they were doing, but I know they were doing things behind the scenes.
Investigators head to Harrisonville to get briefed on the Kara Jo Roberts case.
Just reading through a case file doesn't give you the whole story. So to talk to an investigator that actually worked that case, it helps paint a better picture of what happened in the other investigation.
I was one of the detectives from Kansas City at the time that was sent to work on this case. Kara Jo and her husband lived right there in the small town. They had a kid. Seemed like a very happy relationship. Just your normal, happy family.
The Roberts family was devastated by a horrific tragedy on November 5th, 2008.
Her husband found Kara in the bathroom. She wasn't wearing any clothes. There were obvious gunshot injuries. She was in the bathtub, and the bathtub was running. There were zip ties that we speculated at the time had been used for bindings.
At the Kara Jo Roberts scene, we found 2 different white-colored zip ties that appear to have been used but cut. We also found a roll of duct tape. On both the zip ties and the duct tape, we had male DNA.
There was DNA found on Kara's body, and there was indications given by the medical examiner that she had been sexually assaulted.
Detectives investigating Nina's murder ask for a rundown of the suspects in Kara Jo's case.
Based on the fact of no forced entry, very much kind of angled towards us believing that the husband may have had something to do with this. A domestic violence type homicide is usually spur of the moment, rage and kind of action, but this could have been a situation where he was trying to control her physically with the bindings, and then it escalated.
Kara Jo's husband claimed he found his wife dead when he got home from work and immediately called 911.
From the time she was last seen to the time when her husband came home and found her was a very tight window. It was only like 45 minutes. Her husband gave what was kind of a complex alibi, but when we went to talk to his friends who were involved in that alibi, they were able to corroborate everything.
DNA testing at the time also cleared Kara Jo's husband, and no other viable suspects were identified. The investigation went cold until the DNA connection to Nina Whitney's murder revives the case 2 years later.
Nina's homicide was a lifeline to the Kara Jo Roberts case. We have double information, and we have a bigger picture of what's going on in both of these acts.
What we have to do at that point is start doing what's called victimology. You basically have to understand the circle of Kara Jo's world, and you look at the circle of Nina's world. You know these 2 cases are linked, and you want to find those commonalities in between.
What was really interesting was all the stuff in the Kara Jo Roberts case that matched up to Nina's case. As far as the tub running, we had a lot of different theories, but our main one was if our suspect was going to commit a rape, they would want to use that tub to wash away evidence after the act. In Nina's case, he turns on the water to try to maybe get her body up into the bathtub. He may have not been able to drag her body up those stairs. Our witness down the street sees this guy walking with a limp, and we thought the limp may have hindered him from getting her body back up to the tub. So just like our case, the Kara Jo Roberts case had someone down the street that saw someone in the neighborhood.
The witness had seen a Jeep, had seen a male going to the Jeep, and that male may have been limping.
And it looked like they were up to no good.
Despite the telling parallels, police can't find anyone connected to both Nina and Kara Jo.
That was not the answer that we wanted as detectives, because that meant that it was somebody totally random. A random person coming in and taking their life. That's like every person's nightmare.
In a case like this, where you know there's a suspect out there that could do this again, it makes it even more urgent to try to catch the person. So you're grasping at straws, looking for any leads, any information, any help you can get to try to solve a case like this.
You can only work with what information you've got coming in, and there wasn't any new information coming in at that point.
Running out of options, detectives turn to the one person who might be able to connect the two victims.
Detective Blank called me, and he said, Paige, I have something to tell you. And what he told me was more horrifying than my mother's homicide. That scared the hell out of me.
Detectives investigating the stabbing death of Nina Whitney have informed her daughter Paige about a stunning development.
Detective Blank told me that there was a DNA match from the saliva they found on my mother's shirt to DNA that they found on Kara Roberts in Harrisonville. Kara had been raped, put in the bathtub, and then shot in the back of the head. The thought that we had a serial killer here in town is enough to cause panic for every female in this city.
We provided information from both crime scenes to Paige. And that's not something we would normally tell our victim's daughter. But in this case, Paige was a probation and parole officer. She is savvy in law enforcement, so we thought we could trust her with that information. We wanted to see if anything in her memory would be jogged to try to figure out if there's any common people, common locations that both victims would have known or gone to.
At the time, I thought it had to be someone who targeted my mother specifically. But when they showed me the evidence in Kara's case, there's just a million things to think about when you're trying to come up with a profile for someone like that.
There wasn't much there that seemed to be connected between the two victims. There wasn't an aha moment in that meeting at all.
It's been 5 months since the murder of Nina Whitney, and investigators are desperate for a break. They turn back to the composite sketch of the man with the limp seen close to Nina's house.
I wasn't necessarily a believer in the composite sketch thing. People make their own determination on whether they think the information they have is valuable to a case. They see that sketch and they decide, well, this guy's got glasses and the guy I know doesn't have glasses. And so the danger in that is that that person may have information, but that person may be turned off by the sketch.
We had run the sketch in the newspaper, but really that sketch hadn't brought in a lot of leads.
Despite their reservations, police hope that more people will see the sketch on billboards around the city, and someone will identify the suspect.
They were able to put that picture along 71 Highway, along with our tips hotline. The number of tips that we received on this case based on that sketch were not as numerous as you would think. All of them have to be followed up on, because there could be something there that you're going to miss if you don't take those tips seriously.
Weeks pass as investigators chase down leads that go nowhere. The lack of progress takes a heavy toll on Nina's family.
I was really angry that she died in her own home in that terror and that panic, helpless and alone and fighting for her life.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I think about my mother's last few minutes of life. I know the neighbor was home next door and nobody heard my mother screaming. I wake up to the sound of her screaming 2, 3 o'clock every morning. It doesn't go away. It does not go away.
There's nothing worse than having to tell a family member, I'm sorry, there's no new information coming in, because they're frustrated. They're of the mindset that, why aren't you out there doing something?
At her wit's end, Paige summons the strength she learned from Nina growing up and takes it upon herself to search for the killer.
The investigation was not moving fast enough to make me happy, so I did feel a need to help them investigate my mother's homicide. I drove around the city and went to every antique shop, every flea market, every thrift store I could think of where she liked to shop.
She was looking for that white male walking with a limp and that black Jeep. And Paige was seeing black Jeeps like that everywhere.
I would take pictures of all the cars that looked like black Jeeps and all the license plates on those vehicles and forwarded all of those to the detectives.
Paige made it her job to be involved, and if she didn't get the answers, then she kept asking.
I can't even explain to you how badly I needed to know who murdered my mother.
Despite Paige's efforts, 6 months after her mother's death, the investigation starts to go cold.
Those kind of unsolved cases in Kansas City leave an entire metro area on edge. As the days turn into weeks and weeks turn into months, how do you keep that case alive within the pages of your newspaper? Most of our weekly papers did not include an update because there was nothing to update in the case.
I kept thinking, this is going to be a cold case. I'm never going to figure it out. I'm never going to figure it out.
You always hope for them to get information to catch a suspect quickly, but I just couldn't fathom who would have done it. I had no suspects in mind.
I drove around and took pictures of the billboards because I wanted to make sure I got pictures of them before they had taken them down. But the sketch concerned me because I don't know if that description was accurate. I thought there's just so many questions that I will never have answers to.
Suddenly, 1 month later, Paige has a realization.
May 26th, 2011, I was driving down 71 Highway in rush hour traffic, and I just happened to glance up and look at the lower half of the billboard, and I swear to you, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like lightning had come out of the sky and hit me in the head. It literally all fell into place as I'm driving down the highway.
Seven months after the murder of Nina Whitney, her daughter Paige has just been struck by a mind-blowing realization.
I was driving down 71 Highway, and I just happened to glance up at the billboard. Prior to that, when they showed me the sketch, the individual did not look familiar to me at all. I just focused on the lower half of his face and the chin, and it just an epiphany. It was Jeff. Jeff Moreland was a boyfriend that I had for 3 years while we were in college. We met in 1983 at Central Missouri State University, had a relationship for 3 years. Jeff and I met in a criminal justice class. He was as sweet and charming and funny as he could possibly be, and I truly fell head over heels in love with him. Once I got my graduate degree, I became a social worker, and Jeff went on to become a police officer. He loved being a police officer. That was his ideal dream job.
Paige and Jeff broke up after 3 years of dating, much to her mother's dismay.
My mother absolutely adored him. For years after we dated, my mother told me she wished I had married him. I know if he showed up on the doorstep, she would happily have let him in the house.
Could Paige's ex-boyfriend from 2 decades prior really be the sadistic serial killer detectives have been hunting for?
I was so lost in my own head, trying to tell myself that Jeff didn't do it. I kept trying to tell myself that I was wrong. But in my gut, I just knew that was him. At the parole office, I'd mentioned it to a couple of the girls that I work with, and they told me that I should run him through the system. So, well, that makes sense. So I ran Jeff through the system. And lo and behold, if he didn't have a black Jeep Wrangler registered in his name, and I nearly lost my cookies. And I also found out Jeff had been a police officer in the Grandview Police Department, but Jeff had retired about 5 years prior to my mother's homicide because he'd had Parkinson's.
Does the Parkinson's diagnosis mean Paige's ex could be the man with a limp spotted near Nina's home? Paige brings her findings to detectives.
I told him that Jeff had been a police officer in Grandview and gave him all the information that I had.
Officers look up Jeff Moreland's home address and discover he lives in the same small town as the first murder victim, Kara Jo Roberts.
He lived in Harrisonville, Missouri. So that was the first person during our investigation that matched all of those factors.
Detective Blank said, yep, it could be him.
Detectives know they have to take extra care when investigating an ex-cop.
Harrisonville is a very small community, and Detective Blank told me that Jeff knew every law enforcement officer in the county, and that he would find out that he was under investigation.
Investigators decide a direct approach is the best option.
We did not believe that we had probable cause at that point to get a search warrant to get his DNA. So we went down and knocked on his front door. I did tell him, your name's come up in a homicide and we need to get a DNA sample from you. If someone were to tell me that, I'd be like, what homicide are you talking about? That was not Mr. Moreland's reaction. He said, well, I've got to go take my cat to the vet. And he went back inside his house. My gut was telling me that we had our guy, but you need to be sure that this is your guy before you go with your gut.
Police again asked Jeff to provide a voluntary DNA sample.
I ended up calling him and telling him again that, hey, we need your DNA to compare to this homicide, and then we'll be done.
Jeff again claims that he's too busy to provide a sample. A week later, investigators receive an unexpected phone call from the police department Jeff retired from, located just outside Kansas City.
So the sergeant with Grandview Police Department calls us and says that he's been in contact with Jeff Moreland and he provided him a DNA sample. We rushed down there and we made contact with the sergeant. On his desk, he had a pill bottle.
The sergeant provides a strange account of how he obtained Jeff's DNA.
Jeff told him that, I want you to meet me at this gas station along 71 Highway. And Jeff shows up in his black Jeep. And Jeff tells him that Kansas City has come and accused him of being involved in a murder. As he's explaining the story, he takes swabs and puts them in his mouth. And then Jeff hands him this bottle along with my card and says, here, give this to the detectives. We tell the sergeant, that sample's not going to work. You can't just provide your own sample. And the sergeant sort of indicated, well, we'll just get rid of it in the trash then. We told him, no, we'll take that bottle off his hands and take that from him.
The evidentiary value of this stuff is just worthless. But obviously, we recover it and we examine it.
That DNA was tested, and it did not match our homicide.
The fact that that DNA came back as not a match just didn't surprise me at all. Had he followed protocol, that would have exonerated him. And he very easily could have done that, but he chose not to.
We more and more really thought that we might have had our suspect based on his actions at that point. We all know about serial killers. I was worried that the suspect was going to do this act again.
A few days later, detectives get the call they've been dreading.
I received a phone call. There was a rape that occurred in Harrisonville. But the victim was able to get away, and then she was able to contact police. The victim took the officers to where this event had occurred the day before. It was Jeff Moreland's residence. So my first question is, where's Moreland at now?
When police go to arrest Jeff, he's nowhere to be found.
Detective Blank told me Jeff may have raped a third victim, and he is now on the run. I didn't know if he would be after me. I didn't know if maybe he had figured out that it was me who initially contacted the police. That was a nightmare.
Former police officer Jeff Moreland is the prime suspect in the murders of Kara Jo Roberts and Nina Whitney. Tragically, a third woman has now been attacked, but Jeff has disappeared, and investigators fear he may strike again.
When I heard that he had taken off, I was worried about Paige.
The detectives told me they truly did not know where he had gone or what he knew. I told Detective Blank he would probably find Jeff in Iowa near his family.
As Paige predicted, a trace on Jeff's cell phone leads police to a motel in Iowa.
He had taken a bunch of over-the-counter sleeping pills. He tried to take his own life and then ended up in a hospital in Des Moines.
Jeff survives the suicide attempt, and he is taken into custody by local police.
We headed up there to Iowa to get Mr. Moreland's DNA. We drove all the way back from Iowa with it. We wanted to be sure he wasn't going to get out of custody or bond out or whatever. And then the next morning, we got the DNA results back. we told Paige that his DNA matched both crime scenes. Jeff is, in fact, involved in the murders of Kara Jo and Nina.
It just blows my mind. And it was beyond all comprehension to me. This was 2010 when he murdered my mother. And Jeff and I split up in 1987. I had no idea what Jeff would become. The last time I actually saw Jeff was in 1994. He told me then that he periodically would patrol up and down my mother's street just to make sure that everything was okay. And at the time I thought, oh, that's so sweet. But now looking back on it, I just don't know.
Jeff Moreland is charged with the murders of Kara Jo Roberts and Nina Whitney and the sexual assault of the third victim. Soon after laying charges, investigators learn about the source of Jeff's phony DNA.
We were contacted by Jeff Moreland's ex-wife, and Jeff Moreland had a daughter with this ex-wife, and that daughter was engaged to someone. And that guy said that Jeff had called him out of the blue, and Jeff told him that he needed a sample of his DNA for a paternity test because someone was accusing Jeff of being the father of a kid. And so he provided a DNA sample and gave it to Jeff Moreland.
Then, Jeff tricked the Grandview police sergeant with some sleight of hand.
So the sergeant provided us a formal statement where he said he wasn't able to see Moreland's hands at all times when Moreland was taking a sample of his DNA.
Jeff's attempted deception backfires, only giving prosecutors more evidence against him.
There's nothing for the defense to attack. There's nothing to be argued because the physical evidence was just overwhelming.
I think it also says a lot that Jeffrey Moreland had 0 witnesses in his defense at the trial.
He got life without parole plus 50 years consecutive on Kara Roberts' homicide. And then he got 10 years for armed criminal action and 20 years for murder second on my mother's case to run concurrent.
With no trial testimony from Jeff, police and the victims' families are left to piece together exactly what happened to Nina Whitney and Kara Jo Roberts.
What we do know is that Jeff Moreland took Kara Jo's life. My personal opinion is he was driving by and saw her in the yard, and he was in that mode where he was hunting and decided that's his target.
After killing Kara Jo, it seems Jeff developed a taste for murder. He struck again 2 years later.
I believe the day that Nina was murdered, Jeff Moreland simply knocked on the door and Nina saw who it was and let him in the house. It's not necessarily uncommon for a predator to go after older women because they feel like they are easier victims.
Of course, my mother would let him in. And then at some point, he had to have started forcing her backwards up the stairs. I think when he got her into her bedroom, that he tried to rip her shirt off of her, forced her onto the bed, but she did fight back. She did run. My mother went running down the stairs. He chased her. He stabbed her 24 times. The kill shot was here through the throat.
At some point, he turns on the water to try to maybe get her body up into the bathtub to wash off his DNA.
But at that point, he knew with his Parkinson's acting up that there was no way he was going to be able to take her body back up 2 flights of stairs and put her in a bathtub. And then he went upstairs to clean the knife off, put the knife in the kitchen drawer, and went out through the sliding glass door.
Investigators believe that before he left, Moreland stole Nina's cell phone to throw police off his trail.
He has the presence of mind to grab that phone and throw that phone in the grass a quarter mile away from Nina's house. He knows that the investigator is going to be caught up in that phone as sort of a way to lead us away from him.
I did not know for 8 months who murdered my mother. The 8 months that I spent not knowing made me insane.
When you have families that do their investigations, sometimes it's not the best. But Paige being involved was actually good in this case because she was actually the person that found Jeff Moreland.
I can't even explain to you how grateful I am. Between my mother's neighbor and the sketch artist, I would have never figured it out. Never would have figured it out if it hadn't been for the two of them.
To call this an unexpected killer is almost an understatement. Jeff Moreland terrorized an entire community.
Police speculate that Jeff's forced retirement a few years before the murders may have been the catalyst that set him on the path to kill.
I feel that when he developed Parkinson's and he had his power taken away from him as a police officer, the murders were almost like him getting revenge on the world.
I joined this organization called Parents of Murdered Children and Other Survivors of Homicide Victims. And we're all basically going through the same thing. So it does help to have someone who understands the enormity of what has happened.
I think Nina would want to be remembered as a strong, independent woman who fought to the end. And that's how I'll always remember her.
There are frogs in the stores everywhere. You can't go anywhere without seeing cute little frogs somewhere. I think about my mother all the time when I see things that I know that she would appreciate, or when I hear country music. I think about her a lot.